My name is Scarlett. I didn't think I'd tell my story, but here I am with a wild tale about my mother-in-law. I'll change names to protect my daughter and me. My story doesn't start with a crazy mother-in-law. I married my high school sweetheart, Daniel, when we were young. Daniel worked at his dad's company, so we were settled early. His mom, Jenny, really liked me, and with his brother, Devin, we were a happy family. Sadly, Daniel's dad died when we were in school. I had great years with Daniel and his family. But then, tragedy struck. One day, Jenny called me at work crying and said, "Scarlett, I have terrible news. Daniel was in a car crash. He didn't make it." I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. My whole world fell apart. I was 5 months pregnant with our baby, Lily. It was a really tough time for me and Daniel's family. Jenny, his mom, struggled a lot with the sadness. She became fixated on me and the baby. She thought Lily was Daniel coming back. She kept saying Lily was her baby and tried to control everything about my pregnancy. Dealing with Jenny was really hard. She threatened me, saying I couldn't move on or leave with my baby. Lily is always going to be with me and Devin. I have already set up a nursery in my house. She will come live with me when she is born. Devin will be your dad. He is Daniel's brother, after all. Jenny, I know you're having a hard time dealing with Daniel's death. Trust me, I'm just as bad, but you can't control me like this. This is my child and not yours. How dare you say this to me? Lily is my child. I will do everything in my power to keep her with me. Don't you dare think you can take her away. As the days passed, Jenny became extremely unhinged. We tried having multiple family discussions about her behavior. We said, "You need to stop being so obsessed with Lily. This is very unhealthy. Mom, we are worried about you. You're acting very strangely. I think you should consider therapy. The only one you should worry about is Scarlett. I know this girl. She'll run away with a new man once the child is born. She'll take away Lily and raise her with someone else. Devin, you can't let her do this. She is your daughter too." Mom, you're not making any sense. Daniel is the father of Lily. A new man will not replace him. I'm her uncle, and that's it. I will be there for her, and so will you. But ultimately, she is Scarlett's daughter. Jenny never listened to us. From hosting a baby shower for herself to demanding presents in the delivery room, Jenny did a lot of things. Just thinking about everything makes me have a panic attack. Devin did his best to control his mother. However, she never improved. The first serious trouble she made was just after I gave birth. She came to my room and asked to hold the baby. When I handed her my daughter, she ran for the door. Luckily, Devin was outside and stopped her with some nurses. From that moment, I knew Jenny couldn't be around my daughter. So I filed the case against her and let the cops deal with her. I was at first hesitant to get a restraining order. I wanted Lily to know her grandma, so I put some boundaries and hoped for the best. Jenny crossed all of them. She tried to take my daughter away several times. She also tried to convince and demand Devin and his girlfriend to adopt Lily. They refused because they are actually the same people. Jenny also didn't like the fact that I was seeing someone when Lily was 2. The last straw came when she tried to take her away from daycare without my permission. We found that she had planned to move to a different state. I immediately confronted her in front of Devin. "What is wrong with you, Jenny? How many times do I have to tell you that you can't see my child without my permission? Even the courts are with me on this. Still, you keep trying to take her away. Lily is my child, and she deserves to be with me. I'll keep her with me until Devin and his girlfriend get married. Then we will be a happy family. You can go have a new child with your boyfriend, Mom. You can't say or do things like this. We have already told you that Lily belongs to Scarlett alone. If she marries again, Lily will have a father figure. You don't have to worry about her." No. This is Daniel's daughter. I won't let anyone else raise her. She is mine and mine only. Scarlett is nothing but a woman. I will take my Lily away from this witch. By that point, I was completely done with Jenny. She never showed any improvement and instead got worse with time. Now I was actually getting worried for Lily's safety, so I decided to file a restraining order against Jenny. I knew that the restraining order would make her go mad, so before she could do any more damage, I shifted to a different country. I took a transfer and left without telling anyone the address. Only Devin knew my address because he was dependable. Jenny's behavior did have a lasting impression on me. I was always paranoid that she would take my child. The first year I moved was hell. Ultimately, I got therapy and decided to get better for my daughter. I was also developing a good connection with Carlos, who was a local resident. He was the reason I moved to the county. Carlos loved my daughter a lot, and they quickly formed a great bond. So I was sure that the relationship would work out. Jenny did find out about Carlos and tried to call me a cheating witch. I'm sure you have been cheating. I will never let you live in peace. I'll bring Lily back to me. Just wait. Jenny, I have a restraining order against you. I don't want to do this, but you have left me no choice. If you really love Lily, you should get therapy and get better for her. Don't tell me what to do, Scarlett. I don't need therapy. I only want my baby Lily back. I only want my baby Lily back. One day, I will take her away from you. Then all you will do is cry. That one phone call was enough to send me into a spiral again. Carlos and my therapist had a tough time soothing my fears. My paranoia skyrocketed again. My world got dark. Somehow, I managed to deal with the situation and kept all these conversations as evidence. Thankfully, with her horrible behavior, I was able to get restraining orders renewed every time they expired. My solace was in the fact that Jenny never knew my new address. For the next few years, things went pretty well for me. I was slowly starting to cope with my mental health problems and tackled Jenny at the same time. I can't begin to tell you just how many phone numbers I had changed. When Lily was 6, I married Carlos and began my life with him. Devin and his girlfriend turned fiancé were invited, but Jenny was strictly not allowed. When Devin went home from my wedding, he did call me about Jenny. Scarlett, Mom found out about your wedding. I think one of your friends posted a picture. She saw it. She's not happy about this. What do I do? Devin, I'm tired of running away from Jenny. Even after years of filing a restraining order, she keeps harassing me. I'm exhausted. Stay strong, Scarlett. I'm doing my best to handle her. I think your marriage and my engagement have given her fresh ideas. I'm afraid she will do something stupid. Don't worry, Devin. I'll be on the watch out. I'm not that naive girl anymore. Jenny can plan as much as she wants. I won't let her take Lily, and I was adamant to protect my child. I quickly ordered high security cameras and installed them all around the house. I also briefed Lily's school and babysitter about Jenny so that she can't cook up weird stories. Carlos was with me through it all. Years of therapy helped me deal with the situation better. While the old me would panic and become paranoid, the new me stayed calm and made plans. I was seriously praying to God that Jenny doesn't pull any stunts this time. I won't let her get away with her antics. Jenny's last crazy episode happened very soon. That morning, I was at my office pulling an overtime shift. Suddenly, I was surprised by a call from Devin. To be honest, I had no idea why he would call me at work. For some reason, my stomach was in knots as I picked up the phone. Devin sounded panicked and said, "Scarlett, you have to listen to me. This is serious. Mom just left me a message that she's bringing back Lily. I know you will never allow that. I'm afraid she will do something stupid." What the hell, Devin? I never gave her permission to take Lily. Hell, we have a restraining order against her. I think Mom is planning to kidnap Lily and bring her to my house. I've tried to change her mind, but I'm afraid she will run away with her if I push her too much. You need to stop her before she takes Lily. Thank you for telling me, Devin. I have no idea why Jenny still hasn't got the hint. Her behavior keeps escalating. She is adamant that Lily should stay with me. Mom is still obsessed with having me replace Daniel as her dad, but she's being very unreasonable. I know she needs help, but she refuses to go to therapy. I'm sorry to say this, Devin, but this time I don't think I can forgive her if she really tries to kidnap my daughter. I will be sending her to jail. Devin said that he understood my stance and why I would do this. He promised to be in touch in case something went wrong. Meanwhile, I started to plan a trap for Jenny. I knew that even if I left work right now, I wouldn't be able to reach home on time, so I picked up my phone and made a call. Then I simply sat back and waited for Jenny to show up. I had a very small hope in my heart that Jenny wouldn't be this crazy. Well, it turns out she is truly crazy. My house has security cameras covering the entire place, so I was able to watch everything while driving back home with a friend. As I watched Lily play on the lawn, I spotted Jenny making an entrance. Guys, Jenny actually tried to take my daughter. I was absolutely enraged by her behavior. Even after what happened, she wanted to ignore the court and take my child. She did it in the afternoon, knowing that I wouldn't be home. However, she didn't know one thing about my life. Carlos and I had gotten married 6 months ago, and just inside the house, Lily's new stepfather was watching everything. As soon as Jenny snatched up Lily, she cried out for Carlos, and immediately he came and blocked the front door. Through the security camera, I could see that Jenny went completely white as a ghost. Then her jaw dropped. My daughter fought off her arms and ran straight to Carlos. There was one thing she didn't know about the new man in my life. Carlos was a police officer. To be precise, he was the sheriff of our county. Jenny just took one look at him, and her jaw dropped, specifically because he was still in his police uniform. He was just back from work and spending time with my daughter before I came home. The call I made from the office was to Carlos. He is the one who picked up my daughter from school and stayed home till I came back. Jenny stupidly thought that I would leave my daughter unsupervised. Instead, she found a living and breathing cop stationed at my house. I heard them say, "What are you doing here, Jenny? I know you are Scarlett's mother-in-law. I'm interested to know what brings you here." "I'm here for my grandbaby. It's time she spends time with me." "Who the hell are you, and where is my grandbaby?" "Well, first of all, you are not supposed to be in this house, and I also know that you don't have any visitation rights with Scarlett's daughter. I would suggest you tell me your intentions since there are cameras in the house." "Who the hell are you? Why are you in this house around my granddaughter? You're not supposed to be here." "I am not an unknown man. I'm her stepfather, and I have full rights to be here." "You are not supposed to be here since you have trespassed into my house, tried to kidnap Lily, and violated restraining orders. I have already called my mates to come and arrest you." No, you cannot arrest me. I'm not doing something wrong. My granddaughter belongs to me and Dean. I won't let Scarlett let a stranger raise Daniel's daughter. Only Devin is fit to be her dad. Listen to me, Jenny. You need to step away from this house right now. The cops will come and arrest you if I don't do it myself. Jenny kept arguing with Carlos while I hurried home to them. My friend from work drove me to my house. While I was watching the confrontation, Carlos kept warning Jenny that she would face some serious charges if she didn't leave. Well, Jenny decided to be a martyr and continued to try and argue with him. As soon as I reached the house, Jenny started to shout at me. She said, "You witch, you intentionally married a cop so that you can take away my granddaughter. This is all you're planning. I always knew you were a total witch." "Calm down, Jenny. You keep forgetting the fact that my cop husband is right in this house. Believe it or not, he will arrest you if you keep harassing us. I won't go down so easily. I'll tell everyone that you were cheating with Carlos before Daniel died. I will ruin your reputation and take Lily." "Carlos, you can add harassment and slander to Jenny's list of offenses now. Looks like she won't stop." Just at that moment, the rest of the cops arrived. They came inside the house and spoke to Carlos about the situation. When Carlos and I gave our statements, Jenny threw another fit. She started to scream and cry about how unfair and selfish we were being. She said, "You are a vile woman, Scarlett. You want to keep me away from Lily. You have no respect for Daniel's memories. Why can't you just give Devin my granddaughter? He's the only one who should be her dad. Now, you have some serious audacity coming to my house and trying to take my daughter away. What makes you think I will ever allow you near her again? She is my granddaughter. I have the right to decide who raises her. The courts are wrong. I deserve to be with Lily." Jenny took that opportunity to attack me again. Yes, this crazy lady tried to assault me in front of my cop husband and friends. She was immediately restrained, and Carlos looked extremely pissed off. He spoke with his colleagues, and in a few seconds, Jenny was taken away in cuffs. She did try to fight those officers, and that added another offense to her already extensive criminal record. She was taken away, but not before she could throw some insanely inappropriate comments towards me and my husband. After everything happened, I took some time off work to be with my daughter. She was still traumatized by everything, especially by the way Jenny tried to grab her and run. Even I am exhausted from dealing with Jenny and had a hard time balancing everything. Carlos has been a huge support to both me and Lily. Lily has even started to call him Dad. She does know about Daniel, but she also sees Carlos as a father. I'm so happy that my little girl is finally starting to have a normal life. Devin and I talked in detail about what went down. He did apologize for his mother's behavior multiple times. I assured him that none of this is his fault and he shouldn't take Jenny's blame. He was a great uncle to Lily and tried to replace Daniel. Devin continues to visit us every week to spend time with Lily and my family. He has since uninvited Jenny from his wedding and is planning to go no contact with her. Speaking of Jenny, she will be spending time in jail by now. She has managed to work towards an impressive list of charges that keeps getting worse. From what Carlos has told me, she will likely face fines along with a short prison sentence. She's tried her best to turn the judge against us, but even the lawyer knows she's a lost cause. We're still waiting for the final hearing, so I can't share all the details of the court proceedings. However, it looks like me, Carlos, and Lily will finally have some peace away from my crazy ex-mother-in-law.
Growing up in the small town of Millbrook, our two-story house wasn't much to look at, but it was home. My parents, both teachers at the local school, made sure my sister Jane and I never went without, even if we weren't swimming in luxury. They had this way of stretching a teacher's salary to make everything work, and somehow, they always did. Jane was my big sister, my best friend, and everything I wasn't. While I preferred the quiet company of books and sketch pads, she was like a firecracker that lit up every room she entered. I can still picture us as kids, climbing the old oak tree in our backyard, making up wild stories about being explorers or royal princesses. Those were simpler times, before our paths started to diverge. As we grew older, the differences between us became more pronounced. Jane was everything I wasn't: outgoing, talented, and seemingly perfect in every way. She wrote poetry that made our English teacher cry, starred in every school play, and still found time to be a star player on the basketball team. Meanwhile, I was just there. The quiet one. The one who'd rather spend lunch break in the library with a book than in the cafeteria with crowds. Our parents never played favorites, at least not openly. They celebrated Jane's achievements with the same enthusiasm they showed for my decent grades and quiet accomplishments. But there was always this unspoken understanding that Jane was destined for greater things. When college acceptance letters started arriving, it wasn't a surprise that Jane got into Riverside University, one of the most prestigious schools in the state. I still remember the day she got her letter. Mom and Dad couldn't stop crying with joy. "Our baby's going to Riverside," Mom exclaimed, hugging Jane tight. "We always knew you were special." Dad was already on the phone, calling relatives. "Did you hear? Jane got into Riverside. Full academic scholarship." That was the beginning of the real divide between us. Not that we stopped loving each other, but life has a way of pulling people in different directions. Jane moved to the city, and I stayed behind, still in our childhood home, still trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. Little did I know then that our sisterly bond would be tested in ways I never could have imagined. That a single golden ring would shatter everything we'd built over the years, and force me to question everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and forgiveness. The phone calls home from Jane became a weekly ritual of success stories and achievements. Each time, I'd sit at the kitchen table, watching Mom's face light up as Jane shared her latest triumph at Riverside. "Did you hear?" Mom would gush to anyone who'd listen. Jane's research paper was published in the university's psychology journal. "She's only a sophomore." Dad would chime in, "and she's maintaining a 4.0 GPA while doing all this extra research. That's our girl." I spent those 2 years after high school working at the local diner, saving what I could for community college. When I finally enrolled at Millbrook Community College, my parents managed a smile and a "That's nice, dear." It wasn't Riverside, but it was something. "You know, Jane was on local TV again yesterday," Mom announced during dinner one evening. They interviewed her about her research on childhood development. She looked so professional. "That's great," I mumbled, pushing my peas around my plate. I worked hard at my studies, I really did. But somehow, getting a B+ in Introduction to Business didn't quite measure up to Jane's published papers and television appearances. My achievements were like candlelight next to her spotlight. After graduation, reality hit hard. While Jane was already establishing herself at Preston Medical Center as a rising star in their psychology department, I was dropping off resumes at local businesses with no callbacks. That's how I ended up working at Aunt Sarah's store as an assistant administrator. She took me on with that look of pity I was getting used to seeing. "It's just temporary," Aunt Sarah said, showing me around. "Until you find something more suitable for someone with a degree." Then came the news that changed everything. Jane called one Sunday evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, Dad, I met someone," she squealed over speakerphone. "His name is Michael, and he's a lawyer at Blackwell and Associates. His family owns half the buildings downtown. I watched my parents exchange knowing looks of approval. Of course Jane would find someone as successful as she was. He's taking me to Paris next month, Jane continued. His family has an apartment there, can you believe it? That's wonderful, sweetheart, Mom exclaimed, while Dad beamed with pride. I sat there, in my old sweatpants, still living in my childhood bedroom, making minimum wage at my aunt's store. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Jane, the successful psychologist dating a wealthy lawyer, and me, the underachieving sister who couldn't seem to get her life started. When do we get to meet him? Mom asked eagerly. Soon. He's taking me to that new French restaurant this weekend, but maybe next week we could come for dinner? I excused myself from the kitchen before they could see the tears welling up in my eyes. It wasn't that I wasn't happy for Jane, I was. But each of her successes somehow felt like they were highlighting my failures. Every step forward she took seemed to push me 2 steps back in comparison. Holidays became a showcase of Jane's exciting life. She'd sweep into our parents' house like a celebrity, bringing stories of important clients, breakthrough therapy sessions, and glamorous dates with Michael. And then the CEO himself thanked me in front of the entire board, she'd say over Thanksgiving dinner, while I quietly passed the mashed potatoes. Tell them about that conference in Boston, honey, Mom would prompt, beaming with pride. I'd sit there in my work clothes from the store, still living in my childhood bedroom, because minimum wage doesn't get you your own apartment in this economy. Even my aunt's employee discount couldn't help me save enough to move out. Then came the announcement we all knew was coming. It was during Christmas dinner when Jane stood up, Michael beside her, both grinning ear to ear. We're getting married, she squealed, extending her left hand to reveal a stunning gold ring with a diamond that caught every light in the room. It's been in my family for generations, Michael explained proudly. My great-grandfather gave it to my great-grandmother in 1925. Mom burst into tears of joy, Dad opened his best bottle of wine, and I forced a smile while something heavy settled in my stomach. The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Jane was at the house constantly, turning our modest home into wedding planning central. Every surface seemed covered with bridal magazines, color swatches, and guest lists. One Saturday in early spring, I had a rare day off. I was sprawled on my bed with my worn copy of Pride and Prejudice when I heard Jane and Mom in the garden below my window. These roses will look perfect for the reception, Jane was saying. We should plant more along this fence. Careful with your ring, sweetie, Mom cautioned. Those thorns can catch on anything. You're right, Jane replied. This glove keeps catching on it. I'll just put it here on the bench for now. I returned to my book, half listening to their chatter about flower arrangements and table settings. The afternoon sun was warm through my window, and I was just getting to my favorite part when I heard Mom's voice. We should get more fertilizer if we're planting all these new roses. Let's run to the garden center. Good idea, Jane agreed. Chris, we're going to the store. Be back soon. I mumbled an acknowledgement, too engrossed in my book to really pay attention. The house fell quiet except for the distant sound of birds in the garden. When they returned, the peace was shattered by Jane's panicked voice. Mom, the ring. It's gone. I looked up from my book at the commotion. Through my window, I could see Jane and Mom frantically searching around the wooden bench, pushing aside gardening tools and flower pots. It was right here. Jane's voice was getting higher with panic. I put it right here on the bench. Don't worry, honey, we'll find it, Mom assured her, but I could hear the worry in her voice. It has to be here somewhere. They searched until the sun started to set, combing through every inch of the garden, but the ring was nowhere to be found. That's when I first saw it in their eyes when they looked up at my window, that flicker of suspicion that would soon grow into something much darker. With shaking hands, Jane dialed Michael's number. I could hear his voice through the phone from across the room, growing louder with each word. What do you mean you lost it? His voice boomed through the speaker. That ring has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother wore that ring through 2 world wars. I'm so sorry, Jane sobbed. We'll find it, I promise. You'd better find it. The violence in his voice made me flinch. I don't care what it takes. That ring is irreplaceable. After she hung up, Jane turned to me, her face twisted with an expression I'd never seen before. You took it, didn't you? What? I felt like I'd been slapped. Jane, I was in my room the whole time. Exactly. You were the only one here. She was screaming now, mascara running down her cheeks. You've always been jealous of me. Mom stepped forward, her face hard. Christina, if you took the ring, you need to return it right now. I didn't take anything. My voice cracked. I swear. Then you won't mind if we search your room, Dad said, already heading for the stairs. I followed them up to my bedroom, watching helplessly as they tore it apart. They rifled through my drawers, emptied my jewelry box, flipped my mattress, and dumped out my purse. Books scattered across the floor, clothes were strewn everywhere, and even my private diary was read page by page. It has to be here somewhere, Jane muttered, throwing my sweaters onto the floor. Hours of searching turned into days, then a week. Each day, the accusations grew worse. Just admit it, Jane cornered me in the kitchen one morning. We all know you took it because you're jealous. You can't stand that I'm getting married while you can't even get a date. Jane, please. Look at you, she spat. 27 years old, living with Mom and Dad, working a pathetic job that Aunt Sarah gave you out of pity. You're a loser, Christina, and you couldn't stand to see me happy. Mom stood in the doorway, arms crossed. We're going to call the police if you don't return it. Go ahead, I shouted back, finally breaking. Call them. I have nothing to hide because I didn't take your precious ring. Each word was like a knife, cutting deeper than the last. The worst part wasn't the accusations or the threats, it was the look in their eyes. The absolute certainty that I was guilty, that I was capable of betraying my own sister out of jealousy and spite. Word spreads fast in a small town. Within days, my parents' version of events had reached every corner of Millbrook. At the grocery store, former neighbors avoided my gaze. At church, people who'd known me since childhood suddenly found reasons to sit in different pews. I was restocking shelves at my aunt's store when I heard her voice behind me. Christina, Aunt Sarah's tone made me freeze. We need to talk. In her small office, she didn't even offer me a seat. Your mother called me this morning. Aunt Sarah, please. She held up her hand. I took a chance on you when no one else would. And this is how you repay me? By stealing your sister's engagement ring? I didn't. Clean out your locker and turn in your keys, her voice was ice. I won't have a thief working in my store. The walk home felt like a death march. Maybe Mom and Dad would finally see how this was destroying my life. Maybe they'd realize I would never do this. I found them in the kitchen. Aunt Sarah fired me, I said, my voice small. Mom didn't even look up from her coffee. Pack your things. What? You heard your mother, Dad said. We want you out by tomorrow morning. The room started spinning. You're kicking me out? Where am I supposed to go? Maybe you should have thought about that before you stole from your sister. Mom finally looked at me, her eyes harder than I'd ever seen them. You brought shame to this family, Christina. I can't even look at my friends in the face anymore. I'm your daughter, I whispered. No daughter of mine would do what you've done. Her words cut like glass. You have until morning. I stumbled upstairs in a daze, pulling my old gym bag from the closet. How do you pack up a life in one bag? Which pieces of yourself do you choose to take? Clothes went in first, enough for a week, maybe 2. 1 pair of sensible shoes. My laptop, wrapped in a sweater. Then came the harder choices. The books that had been my friends when I had none, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Little Women. Stories of other women who had to find their way in a hostile world. Through it all, I couldn't stop crying. These walls had heard my first words, seen my first steps. This room had been my refuge through every storm of my life. Now it was just another place I wasn't welcome. My phone buzzed with messages from old friends. "I can't believe you would do this," and "How could you?" and "Don't contact me again." Sitting on my stripped bed, surrounded by the remnants of my life, I realized there was nothing left for me in Millbrook. Every bridge was burned, every door closed. Whatever I was going to become, it wouldn't be here. I had to leave. Not just this house, but this town, these memories, this life that had become a prison of accusations and distrust. Somewhere out there, I had to believe, was a place where I could start over. Where no one knew me as the sister who stole the ring, the daughter who betrayed her family, the girl who wasn't good enough. At 3 a.m., while staring at my phone's dwindling contact list, I remembered Rachel. We'd been close in college, before life pulled us in different directions. My fingers shook as I dialed her number, praying she still used it. "Chris?" Her voice was groggy with sleep. "What's wrong?" The whole story poured out of me between sobs. When I finished, there was a long pause. "I have a spare room," she said finally. "I'm in Portland now. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it." I checked my bank account, $342.17. Just enough for a one-way bus ticket to Oregon and maybe a meal or two. "When can you come?" Rachel asked. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "I have to leave tomorrow." The bus ride took 2 days. I spent most of it staring out the window, watching the familiar landscapes of my life fade into unknown territory. My gym bag sat on my lap like a life preserver, everything I now owned contained in one small space. Rachel was waiting at the station, just like she promised. She hugged me without hesitation, and for the first time in weeks, I felt human again. "The store where I work is hiring," she said as we drove to her apartment. "It's just retail, but it's something." I started the next day. The store manager took one look at my business degree and my desperate eyes and handed me a name tag. "You start on Register 3. I threw myself into the work like it was a lifeline. Every shift, every sale, every minute was 1 minute further from Millbrook and the wreckage I'd left behind. When other employees complained about long hours, I volunteered to stay longer. When they grumbled about difficult customers, I took them on with a smile. 3 months in, they made me a floor supervisor. 2 months after that, assistant manager. By the 8-month mark, I was managing my own department. "You're different from most people we promote," my district manager said during my review. "You have hunger." He was right. I was hungry, not just for success, but for vindication, for proof that I could be more than what my family thought I was. The day I signed the lease on my own apartment was the day I finally felt free. It was small, just a studio with a kitchenette, but it was mine. No one could tell me to leave, no one could search through my things, no one could question my right to be there. I changed my phone number that same day. Deleted every social media account. Erased every digital footprint that could lead back to Millbrook. Rachel thought I was being extreme, but she didn't argue. "They're still your family," she said once, carefully. "No," I replied, unpacking boxes in my new place. "Family believes in you. Family stands by you." They stopped being my family the day they chose not to believe me. At night, in my new bed, in my new life, I sometimes wondered about them. Was Jane married now? Did Mom still garden? Did Dad still read the paper every morning at the kitchen table? But wondering was dangerous. Wondering led to doubting, and doubting led to that dark place where I questioned everything, including myself. So I focused on work, on building something new, on becoming someone who couldn't be dismissed or discarded. Someone who didn't need anyone else's approval or belief. Someone who could survive being erased from her own family's story. Despite my best efforts to move forward, there were nights when curiosity got the better of me. On those nights, I'd ask Rachel to check Jane's social media accounts from her phone. She got married, Rachel told me one evening, scrolling through photos. Big white dress, church wedding. "Your parents look happy in the pictures." I nodded, pretending the information didn't cut like a knife. A year later, she's pregnant, Rachel reported, showing me a photo of Jane cradling her belly, Michael's hand protectively placed over hers. She looked radiant. For years passed this way, me building my new life in Portland while getting occasional glimpses of my old one through Rachel's phone screen. For years of watching my family's life continue without me, through carefully curated photos and posts that never mentioned the missing daughter, the lost sister. Then came the call that changed everything. "Chris." Rachel's voice was breathless. "You need to see this." She sent me a screenshot of Jane's latest post. "To my sister Christina, I'm sorry. I was wrong. If anyone knows where she is, please help me find her. I need to make this right. Please share this post. Help me find my sister." I stared at the words until they blurred. "It's probably some kind of trick," I said finally. "I don't think so," Rachel replied softly. "Look at the comments. Your parents are there too, begging you to contact them." My hands shook as I read their comments. "Mom, please come home, sweetheart. We need to talk to you. Dad, we made a terrible mistake. Please give us a chance." After 4 years of silence, their words seemed surreal. But something in their desperation felt genuine. I called the old house number, half expecting it to be disconnected. Mom answered on the first ring. "Hello?" Her voice hadn't changed. "It's me," I said quietly. The sharp intake of breath, then, "Christina? Oh God, Christina." I could hear her crying, calling for Dad. Their voices tumbled over each other. "Please come home. We need to see you. There's something you need to know." "I can come next weekend," I heard myself say. The drive back to Millbrook was the longest of my life. Each mile marker brought back memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The town looked exactly the same, as if it had been frozen in time while I'd been away. Jane's car was in the driveway when I arrived. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked up the familiar path to the front door. They were all waiting in the living room, Mom, Dad, and Jane. 4 years had changed them too. Mom's hair was grayer, Dad looked smaller somehow, and Jane was holding a sleeping baby about 4 years old on her lap. "We found it," Mom said, her voice breaking. "The ring. We found it." Dad stepped forward. "We were replanting the roses last week, and there it was, tangled in the roots." "Right where?" "Right where I knocked it off the bench that day," Jane finished, tears streaming down her face. "The ring fell, and then we covered it with soil while planting. It's been there all this time, growing deeper with the roses." The revelation broke something in all of us. Suddenly, the living room was filled with raw, uncontrolled sobbing. Mom collapsed into Dad's arms, her whole body shaking. Dad's quiet composure finally cracked as tears streamed down his weathered face. Jane sank to her knees, her cries waking her sleeping son. And I, after 4 years of holding everything inside, of being strong, of surviving, I finally let go. The tears came in waves, years of pain and loneliness pouring out in gut-wrenching sobs. "I'm so sorry, Chris," Jane choked out between gasps. "I was horrible to you. Cruel. Unforgivable. I let my fear and Michael's anger cloud my judgment. I chose to believe the worst about my own sister." Mom reached for my hand, but stopped short, uncertain. "We failed you as parents," she whispered through her tears. "We should have believed in you, protected you. Instead, we..." She couldn't finish. "Please," Jane pleaded, "tell us how to make this right. I'll do anything. We all will." I looked at them, these people who had once been my whole world, then my worst nightmare, and now I wasn't sure what they were. "I can't just pretend the last 4 years didn't happen," I said finally, wiping my eyes. "You didn't just accuse me, you condemned me. Turned the whole town against me. Threw me out with nothing but a gym bag and no place to go. What if..." Mom hesitated, then continued, "What if we saw someone? A family therapist? Someone who could help us rebuild what we broke." "Once a month," Dad added quickly, his voice still thick with emotion. As long as it takes. I looked at the little boy on the couch, my nephew, I realized with a start. He had Jane's nose and Michael's dark hair. 4 years of his life had passed without an aunt. I'm not moving back to Millbrook, I said firmly. I have a life in Portland now. A good job. Friends who stood by me when no one else would. We understand, Jane said. We don't deserve to have you back in our lives. But if you're willing to try, even a little. It took 3 months before I agreed to my first holiday visit, Thanksgiving. I brought Rachel with me for support. The dinner was awkward, full of careful conversations and avoided topics, but it was a start. Dr. Martinez, our family therapist, helps us navigate the harder conversations. In her office, we talk about trust and betrayal, about the weight of expectations and the poison of assumptions. Sometimes we leave her sessions angry or hurt, old wounds reopened. But slowly, carefully, we're learning to hear each other. Jane's son, my nephew Tommy, is the easiest part. 4-year-olds don't carry grudges or remember family sins. To him, I'm just Aunt Chris, who brings him books from Portland and teaches him to draw. His innocent love is like a bridge between who we were and who we might become. The roses still bloom in Mom's garden, including the ones that grew around that ring for 4 years. Sometimes I look at them and think about how truth, like a ring in the earth, can get buried under layers of assumptions and accusations. But truth, like those roses, finds its way to the surface eventually. I'm not the same person who left Millbrook with a gym bag and a broken heart. They're not the same people who cast me out. We're all learning that healing, like gardening, takes time, patience, and constant care. Some days are harder than others, but we keep trying. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. But when you're in love, your heart has a way of glossing over the red flags your mind tries to wave at you. I'm Rose, and this is the story of how I met my husband and his family. David and I both worked at TechCore Solutions as software developers. He caught my eye right away, not just because he was handsome, but because he had this quiet confidence about him. Unlike some of our colleagues who lived and breathed code, David could actually hold a conversation about other things. Hey, did you catch the new episode of Black Mirror last night? He asked one morning, stopping by my desk with 2 cups of coffee. That was how it started, simple conversations about shared interests that grew into something more. We discovered we both loved sci-fi shows, hiking on weekends, and had the same terrible taste in B-movies. Our lunch breaks got longer, and our after-work quick coffees turned into dinner dates. Before I knew it, a year had passed, and David wanted me to meet his family. They're really down to earth, he assured me as we drove to his mother's house. Mom's excited to meet you, and my sister Sarah lives there too, with her husband Mike and their son Tommy. The house was modest but well kept, with toys scattered across the front yard. Sarah opened the door before we could knock, bouncing her 4-year-old on her hip. Finally, she exclaimed, pulling David into a hug. Mom, they're here. Linda, David's mother, appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron and a warm smile. There's my successful son, she beamed, hugging him tight before turning to me. And this must be Rose. David's told us so much about you. During dinner, I watched how they interacted. They seemed like a normal family, clearly proud of David's achievements at work. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until Sarah started talking about Tommy's upcoming birthday. David, she said, giving him her best puppy dog eyes, Tommy's been begging for that new Nintendo game. The one with the dinosaurs? Sarah, David started, but his mother jumped in. Oh, let him spoil his nephew a little. You're doing so well at that fancy tech company, Linda laughed, patting David's hand. Then she turned to me with what seemed like a light-hearted smile. I just hope after the wedding, he won't forget he has a mother and sister to take care of too. I smiled politely, thinking she was joking. Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on. I didn't realize then that her words weren't actually a joke at all. 6 months later, David and I got married in a small ceremony. We found a nice apartment for rent near our office, and I thought we were starting our life together perfectly. The honeymoon phase of our marriage didn't last long, literally. We'd barely unpacked our suitcases from our actual honeymoon when the requests started rolling in. First, it was Sarah calling about Tommy's school supplies. Then Linda needed help with some home repairs. The requests were endless, and each time, David would pull out his wallet without hesitation. At first, I tried to ignore it. The amounts weren't huge, and David made good money at TechCore. But it started to feel like death by 1,000 cuts, $100 here, $200 there. Every week brought a new emergency that only David could solve. One night, after Sarah called about needing money for Tommy's new winter clothes, I decided it was time for a conversation. I waited until David and I were doing the dishes together, our nightly routine. "Hun," I started, carefully choosing my words, "can we talk about something?" He looked at me, soap suds up to his elbows. "Sure, what's up?" "It's about the money, for your family." I saw his shoulders tense slightly. "Don't you think it's becoming a bit excessive?" David's face flushed with embarrassment as he dried his hands. I know. I'm just used to helping them out. I've been doing it since I got my first job." "But your mom has a good pension," I pointed out gently. "And Sarah has Mike, shouldn't he be providing for his own family?" David let out a long sigh and leaned against the counter. "Mike, well, he hasn't actually worked in over a year." "What?" I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. "Why not?" "He keeps quitting. Every job he gets, there's always something wrong. The work is too hard, the boss is unreasonable, the commute is too long." David ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. "There's always an excuse." I set down the dish towel and turned to face my husband. "David, I love how much you care about your family. But we need to think about our future too. We want to buy a house someday, right? Have our own children?" "Of course," he nodded. "Then we need to start prioritizing our own family," I said softly, taking his hand. "Supporting your mom and sister is kind, but we can't keep doing it at the expense of our own dreams." David was quiet for a long moment, absently playing with my fingers. Finally, he looked up. "You're right. We should be saving for our future. What if we set up a separate savings account specifically for the house? We can put a fixed amount in there every month, no touching it for any reason." "That sounds perfect," I smiled, relieved he understood. We spent the rest of the evening planning our savings strategy, and for the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly on the same page about our future. 2 months into our new savings plan, Linda invited us over for Sunday dinner. I had a nagging feeling about it, but David insisted we should go. "They're still family," he said, squeezing my hand as we drove over. The tension was palpable from the moment we walked in. Sarah was setting the table, her movements sharp and angry. Mike was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Linda's smile seemed forced as she hugged David, barely acknowledging my presence. The first 20 minutes of dinner were filled with awkward small talk about the weather and Linda's garden. I pushed my meatloaf around the plate, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. "David, honey," Linda began, her voice dripping with sweetness, "I noticed you haven't sent any money for the past 2 months. Is everything okay at work?" The clinking of forks against plates stopped. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. David cleared his throat, and I saw him straighten his shoulders, something he always did when he was nervous. "Actually, Mom," he said, his voice steady but quiet, "Rose and I are saving up to buy a house. We want to start our own family soon." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down, her eyes boring into me. Sarah's face turned red, and I could see the storm brewing. "A house?" Sarah's voice cracked. "While I'm here pregnant with my second child, barely able to afford prenatal vitamins? Do you know how expensive baby things are these days?" I felt my blood begin to boil. 2 months of biting my tongue, and I couldn't hold back anymore. Maybe your husband should think about that, I said, nodding toward Mike, who was still somehow managing to check his phone under the table. Sarah's face crumpled. How dare you? You're so cruel. The tears started flowing, right on cue. You don't understand our situation. Mike finally looked up from his phone. Hey, I'm trying here. Do you know how hard it is to find a good job in this economy? I'm dealing with depression, you know. Something in me snapped. Depression didn't stop you from having another baby, did it? The room exploded. Sarah wailed louder. Mike started defending himself about his job search, but Linda's voice rose above them all. You, she pointed her finger at me, face contorted with rage. You're trying to turn my son against his own family. We were happy before you came along with your selfish ideas. Selfish? I stood up so quickly, my chair scraped against the floor. Wanting to build a future with my husband is selfish? Mom, stop, David tried to interrupt, but Linda was on a roll. She's poisoning your mind against us. Your own mother and sister. How dare she tell us we can't have help from our own family? I couldn't take any more. Without a word, I grabbed my purse and walked out. David followed close behind, and we got into the car in silence. The sound of Linda's shout still echoed from the house as we pulled away. The drive home was painfully quiet. I watched the streetlights flash by, fighting back tears of frustration. Finally, as we pulled into our apartment complex, David spoke. You were right, he said softly. About everything. But maybe we need to be more gentle with them. They're not going to change overnight. I turned to look at him, saw the conflict written all over his face. Part of me wanted to argue that his family didn't deserve gentleness, that they needed a reality check. But looking at my husband's pained expression, I just nodded. The aftermath of our dinner confrontation played out in the most modern way possible, on social media. Sarah began posting daily updates that made my blood boil. Struggling to afford prenatal vitamins for my baby. Pregnant and broke, family struggle, one post read. Another showed an empty shopping cart, having to cut back on groceries this month. Sometimes I wonder how we'll manage with another little one on the way. The posts kept coming, each one more dramatic than the last. Pictures of Tommy looking sad beside empty toy store windows, long paragraphs about the importance of family support, pointed comments about some people having their priorities wrong. I caught David checking his phone constantly, his face getting more strained with each notification. One evening, after he'd been particularly quiet, I found him staring at a photo Sarah had posted of Tommy's worn-out shoes. You can send her something, I said softly, touching his shoulder. Small amounts. Just, let's keep our savings plan intact. The relief on his face was immediate. So David started sending Sarah a modest monthly amount again. Like magic, the tragic social media posts decreased, though they never completely stopped. Linda began extending dinner invitations once more, though the atmosphere was far from warm. Would you like more potatoes, David? Linda would ask warmly, then slide her eyes past me as if I were invisible. Sarah would only address her brother, speaking about me in the third person even when I sat right there. I wonder if your wife would mind passing the salt, she'd say, staring at the ceiling. I took it all in stride. Because while they were busy giving me the cold shoulder, something amazing was happening at work. TechCore landed a massive contract with Global Tech, one of the biggest names in the industry. David and I had both been instrumental in securing the deal, and our compensation reflected that. Suddenly, our combined income nearly doubled. Our savings account grew faster than we'd ever dreamed possible. We kept living modestly, but allowed ourselves a few luxuries, a new hybrid SUV to replace David's struggling sedan, a weekend trip to the coast here and there. As our bank account grew, so did our dreams. We started looking at real estate listings, discussing neighborhoods, planning for our future. For the first time since our wedding, I felt like we were truly moving forward. It was during one of our now tense family dinners that Linda dropped her latest bomb. I was quietly eating my pot roast, trying to ignore the usual cold shoulders, when she cleared her throat dramatically. "I saw your vacation photos on Facebook," she announced, fixing me with an icy stare. "Palm Springs, wasn't it? That resort looked expensive." I felt David tense beside me. Here we go again, I thought. "Those infinity pools, luxury spa treatments," Linda continued, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Really, David, I don't think it's appropriate to flaunt such a luxurious lifestyle when your sister can barely make ends meet with 2 children." The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. As she spoke, the clicking of computer keys provided a steady background rhythm. Mike sat at the desk in the corner, completely absorbed in his newest video game, the 3rd new release he'd bought this month, by my count. I couldn't help myself. "Speaking of making ends meet," I said, gesturing toward Mike, "there are plenty of job openings in tech support at our company. The pay is good, and the benefits are excellent." The clicking stopped for a moment, then resumed even louder. Sarah's face turned that familiar shade of red. "You have no idea what it's like," she snapped. "Try being a mother of 2 before you judge us." "Oh wait, you wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" The barb stung, but I kept my face neutral. Mike continued playing his game, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Or maybe he just didn't care. I could have pointed out that being a mother was Sarah's choice, just like having a second child while unemployed was their choice. I could have mentioned that the cost of Mike's gaming habit could probably cover those prenatal vitamins she was always complaining about on Facebook. I could have started another fight. Instead, I just shook my head and took another bite of pot roast. Later that night, as David and I drove home, I thought about the monthly transfers he still made to his sister's account. The amount wasn't small, it could have furnished an entire room in our future house, but our new salaries meant we could handle it without derailing our plans. Sometimes keeping the peace came with a price tag, and for now, we could afford it. Meanwhile, Sarah's demands evolved from subtle hints to full-blown gift registries. Every holiday, Christmas, Easter, birthdays, Mother's Day, yes, she expected gifts from her brother for Mother's Day, came with a detailed list of expensive items she needed for herself and the kids. "David, look at this," I said one evening, showing him the latest email from his sister. It was a Christmas list that included designer clothes, the latest iPad, and premium toys that cost more than our monthly car payment. David sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I'll talk to her. This is getting ridiculous." But when he called Sarah to explain that he was already helping with monthly support, the waterworks started immediately. I could hear her shrill voice through the phone, "I'll tell Mom. You care more about your wife's feelings than your own family's needs." After watching David struggle through 3 such conversations, I'd had enough. While he was in the shower one evening, I opened Sarah's latest gift requirements email and started editing. The $800 designer purse became a $400 alternative. The $1,000 iPad became a $500 tablet. Every item, cut exactly in half. "Here," I said, showing David my revised list. "This is what we're doing." He looked uncertain. "Sarah won't be happy." "Sarah's never happy," I pointed out. "But this is still generous." When the gifts were delivered, the reaction was exactly what I expected. Sarah called David in tears, and Linda left a scathing voicemail about cheap knockoffs. At the next family dinner, they both shot daggers at me with their eyes. "I just don't understand why you couldn't get the items I specifically requested," Sarah sniffed. I gave her my sweetest smile. "Oh, but didn't you know? It's not about the price tag, it's the thought that counts. We put a lot of thought into choosing these alternatives." The look she gave me could have curdled milk. A year passed in this strange dance of passive-aggressive gift-giving and tense family dinners. Then came the Easter gathering that would change everything. Sarah waited until everyone was seated at the table, then stood up with what she clearly thought was a radiant expression. "I have wonderful news," she announced. "We're expecting baby number 3. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt David stiffen beside me. A 3rd child? With no income? No home of their own? My mind spun with calculations of how much more this would add to our monthly family support payments. Mike, predictably, didn't look up from his phone. Linda, however, was ecstatic. "Oh, my darling," she cried, hugging Sarah. "This is wonderful news. 3 beautiful grandchildren." Then she turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "You should take notes, Rose. Sarah's such a wonderful example of a real woman. Here she is, about to have her 3rd child, while you still haven't given David any." The room went quiet. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I set down my fork carefully, making sure my voice was steady when I spoke. "I believe in doing things in the right order," I said coolly. "First, build a stable foundation, like having our own home and being able to provide for our children without depending on handouts. Then, start a family." Linda and Sarah exchanged looks, before breaking into artificial laughter. "Oh, Rose," Linda said condescendingly, "you're so corporate. Family isn't about money and houses." "No," I agreed, taking a sip of water. "It's about responsibility." The tension around the table was thick enough to cut with a knife, but I didn't care anymore. Let them laugh. Let them think I was cold and calculating. At least my future children would have a roof over their heads that nobody could take away. Sarah's 3rd baby arrived in September, another boy. Meanwhile, David and I had reached our savings goal. After months of house hunting, we finally found it, our perfect home. A beautiful 2-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, a spacious backyard, and a kitchen that made me want to learn to cook properly. It was in an excellent school district, just a 20-minute drive from work. We spent weeks planning renovations, picking paint colors, and choosing furniture. Every room held a promise: the sunny bedroom that would make a perfect nursery, the basement we could turn into a playroom, the office space where we could work from home when needed. Then came the dinner invitation from Linda. "Mom wants us to come over tonight," David said, checking his phone. "She says it's important." Something felt off about the invitation, but I couldn't put my finger on what. When we arrived, everyone was there: Linda, Sarah, Mike, and all 3 kids. They had this strange, almost smug energy about them. Sarah was practically bouncing in her seat, while Linda wore the self-satisfied smile I'd learned to dread. "So," Linda began after we'd settled in, "I hear congratulations are in order. You bought a house?" I nodded, still riding the high of our achievement. "Yes, we just closed last week. It's perfect for—" "Well," Linda cut me off, "that's actually what we wanted to discuss." She folded her hands on the table, like a business executive about to close a deal. "You and David are still young, no children yet. You can continue living in your apartment just fine." I felt my smile freeze. What was she getting at? "But Sarah, my poor girl, has 3 beautiful children, cramped up in this house. They need space to grow, a yard to play in." Linda's voice dripped with false concern. "So, we've decided that you should give your new house to Sarah and her family." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But Linda's face remained serious. Sarah was nodding enthusiastically, while Mike finally looked up from his phone, showing interest for the first time in months. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to say, looking between them. "You want us to give away our house? The house we spent years saving for?" Sarah leaned forward. "I'm a mother of 3, she said, as if that explained everything. "I have a right to provide my children with proper living conditions. You can always buy another house later." I turned to David, my heart pounding. "Are you hearing this? Do you finally see how entitled they are?" But before David could respond, Linda's smile widened. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "I raised my son right. He knows where his loyalties lie, with his mother and sister. Isn't that right, David?" Bang! David's fist came down on the table so hard the dishes rattled. He shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger I'd never seen before. Linda and Sarah actually flinched, their smug expressions dissolving into shock. "That's enough. David's voice boomed through the room. Even Mike dropped his phone. I have sat here for years watching you manipulate and guilt me. I've supported you financially, emotionally, constantly. I've given you money while you, he pointed at Mike, sit around playing video games all day. I've listened to you insult my wife, belittle our choices, and demand more and more. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but David cut her off. No, you don't get to talk right now. Do you have any idea how much money I've given you over the years? Thousands upon thousands of dollars. And now you have the audacity to demand our house? Linda tried to interject. David, sweetie. Don't sweetie me, Mom. You think you raised me right? Teaching me that it's okay to leech off relatives? That it's acceptable to demand they give up their home? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know what? You actually did raise me right enough to finally see how toxic this all is. He grabbed my hand, pulling me up from my chair. We're done. All of this? It's over. No more money, no more gifts, no more manipulation. Find someone else to be your ATM. But the children, Sarah started crying. Should be your and Mike's responsibility, David shouted. Not mine, not Rose's. Yours. Still holding my hand, he pulled me toward the door. Don't call us. Don't text us. Don't send us your lists of demands. We're done. The last thing I saw as we left was their stunned faces, frozen in disbelief. David practically ran to the car, helping me in before jumping into the driver's seat. As we pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help myself. I grabbed his face and kissed him hard. I love you, I whispered against his lips. I'm so proud of you. He hugged me tight, and I felt him trembling slightly. I should have done that years ago. I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up to them. The next few weeks were a hurricane of desperate attempts at contact. Linda called constantly, alternating between tears and threats. Sarah sent lengthy texts about how we were destroying her family. Flying monkeys, in the form of distant relatives, called to tell us how cruel we were being. But David stood firm. He blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and we focused on making our new house a home. We painted walls, bought furniture, and started planting a garden. Each day that passed, I watched the weight of his family's manipulation lift from his shoulders. One morning, as we sat in our beautiful kitchen, drinking coffee and planning to convert one of the bedrooms into a nursery, David reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you, he said simply. For helping me find my spine. For showing me what real family should be like. For being patient while I figured it all out. As I write this, sitting in our cozy living room, I can't help but smile. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you deserve. Sometimes you have to build your own. And that's exactly what we're doing, one day, one room, one dream at a time. The nursery paint samples are spread out on the coffee table in front of me, and tomorrow we have our first appointment with the fertility specialist. Life isn't perfect, but it's ours. And that's all that matters. I never thought I'd get married again at 44, but life has a way of surprising you. My name is Dorothy, and I met Robert at a colleague's retirement party. He was charming, successful, and 2 years older than me. After my first marriage ended, I'd focused on raising my daughter Emily, never expecting to find love again. But Robert changed all that. We clicked immediately, sharing the same dry sense of humor and love for quiet evenings at home. We both had our baggage, me with my daughter Emily, and him with Jessica. Emily was 22 then, already dating her boyfriend Mark seriously. Jessica was about the same age, living on her own and working at a marketing firm downtown. I remember being so nervous about meeting her, wanting to make a good impression. That first meeting should have been a warning sign. Jessica barely looked at me, spending most of the dinner texting on her phone. When Robert asked her what she thought of me later, she just shrugged and said, "She's fine, I guess." Robert and I decided to keep things simple when we got married. No big ceremony, just a quiet affair at City Hall with our closest family members. We celebrated at a small restaurant afterward, nothing fancy, but it felt perfect to me. Emily was there, beaming with happiness for me. Jessica showed up late and left early, claiming she had work commitments. Living together in Robert's apartment took some adjustment. Emily visited often for dinner, and she and Robert got along great. He'd help her with career advice, and they'd joke around like they'd known each other forever. But Jessica, that was a different story. "Hi Jessica, how's work going?" I'd ask when she'd come over. "Fine," she'd reply, not even looking up from her phone. "I made your favorite pasta, the one your dad mentioned." Not hungry. Every conversation was like pulling teeth. I tried everything, asking about her job, her hobbies, her friends. Nothing worked. She'd answer in monosyllables if she bothered to answer at all. One evening, I was heading to the kitchen when I overheard Jessica talking to Robert in his study. The door was slightly ajar, and I know I shouldn't have listened, but I couldn't help myself. "Dad, I just don't get what you see in her," Jessica was saying, her voice dripping with disdain. "She's so basic. Nothing like Mom. Have you seen how she dresses? Total simpleton." I waited for Robert to defend me. He just sighed and said, "Honey, give her a chance. She makes me happy." I walked away quietly, my heart heavy. I'd always known I wasn't some sophisticated socialite, I'm just an ordinary woman who tries to be kind and genuine. But hearing Jessica's words hurt more than I expected. I was washing dishes one Sunday afternoon when Emily burst through the door, practically bouncing with excitement. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes were sparkling in a way I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. Mom, she grabbed my wet hands, not caring about the soap suds. "Mark proposed." I dropped the plate I was holding back into the sink and pulled her into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart. Tell me everything." We sat at the kitchen table, and Emily told me all about how Mark had taken her to the spot where they had their first date. Robert was at work, which was probably for the best. This was a moment just for us. He got down on one knee. "Mom," Emily said, showing me the ring. "And you know what I thought about right after I said yes?" I shook my head, smiling at her enthusiasm. "Your wedding dress. The one I used to try on when I was little. Remember how you'd let me parade around in it, even though it was practically swallowing me whole?" My heart swelled. I'd kept that dress carefully preserved for 25 years, hoping for exactly this moment. "I still have it, sweetie. It's in perfect condition." Emily's eyes widened. "Really? You'd let me wear it?" "Of course. I've been saving it for you all these years. Come on, let's go look at it right now." We spent the next hour in my walk-in closet, carefully taking the dress out of its preservation box. Emily's eyes welled up when she saw it. The intricate beadwork still sparkled, and the silk was as creamy white as the day I'd first worn it. "Mom, it's even more beautiful than I remembered," she whispered, running her fingers over the fabric. "And you said this was from that famous designer, right? The one who just passed away last year?" I nodded. "Yes, it was one of his early pieces. I saved for months to afford it. $3,000 was a fortune back then." A few days later, I was scrolling through my social media feed when I saw Emily's post. My daughter had always had a flair for the dramatic, and this announcement was no exception. "In 6 months, I'll be walking down the aisle in something incredibly special," she'd written. My mom's vintage wedding dress from one of fashion's most legendary designers. "Starting a new family tradition, all the women in our family will wear this piece of history. Can't wait to share photos of my beautiful mom in her youth, wearing this dress, alongside my wedding photos. Vintage bride, family tradition, designer." The comments started pouring in immediately. Emily's friends were going crazy over it. "Oh my God, isn't that the designer whose vintage pieces are selling for like $50,000 now? You're so lucky. That dress must be worth a fortune. Please tell me you'll post the side-by-side photos. That's such a cool tradition." Emily responded to them all, clearly enjoying the excitement. When someone asked about the original price, she wrote, "Mom spent about $3,000 on it back then. Best investment ever, right?" As I read through the comments, I couldn't help but smile at my daughter's enthusiasm. But something in the back of my mind nagged at me, a strange feeling that this social media post was going to cause trouble. I just didn't know how right that feeling would turn out to be. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. Robert was at work, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door and saw Jessica standing there, I almost didn't believe my eyes. In the 3 years I'd been married to Robert, she had never once come to see me when her father wasn't home. "Can I come in?" she asked, her tone unusually polite. "I need to talk to you about something." I stepped aside, still trying to process this unexpected visit. "Of course. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thanks." She walked straight to the living room and sat down, her designer purse perched perfectly on her lap. Something about her demeanor made me nervous. She seemed too composed, too deliberate. "I saw Emily's post," she said without preamble, her fingers fidgeting with the clasp of her purse. "About the wedding dress." "Oh?" I sat down across from her, wondering where this was going. Jessica had never shown any interest in anything related to Emily before. "My wedding is in 4 months," she continued, looking directly at me for what felt like the first time ever. 2 months before Emily's. I nodded, still not quite following. "Yes, Robert mentioned that. The planning is going well, I hope?" Jessica leaned forward slightly. "I want to wear the dress." The words hung in the air between us. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "The designer dress," she clarified, as if I might not understand. "The one Emily posted about. I want to wear it at my wedding." My mouth opened and closed a few times before I found my voice. "Jessica, I don't think that would be appropriate. That dress has been promised to Emily since she was a little girl." "But I'm getting married first," she pressed, her voice taking on an edge I knew too well. "And I'm your stepdaughter now. Shouldn't that mean something?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Jessica, Emily has been dreaming about wearing this dress since she was tiny. She used to put it on and twirl around in it when it was practically dragging on the floor behind her. It's been our special thing for over 2 decades. So reschedule her wedding," Jessica said, as if it was the most obvious solution in the world. "Let me wear it first, then she can have it." I shook my head slowly. That's not how this works. Emily and Mark have already booked their venue, sent save the dates. But listen, if you really want to wear the dress, maybe you could consider moving your wedding to after Emily's? Then you could. Are you seriously suggesting I postpone my entire wedding? Her eyes narrowed. Think about it logically, I tried to reason with her. You're getting married first. If you wear the dress, everyone will see it in your wedding photos, all over social media. You and Emily share so many mutual friends, they'll all see both weddings. Emily would be devastated to walk down the aisle in a dress that's already been splashed all over Instagram from your wedding. Can you understand how that would make her feel? Jessica's face turned red, and she jumped to her feet so quickly that her designer purse fell to the floor. You're just a selfish, greedy witch, she screamed, her composure completely shattered. You've never wanted me to be part of this family. You probably get some sick pleasure from saying no to me. I stood up too, stunned by the sudden outburst. Jessica, please, that's not. Save it. She was practically shaking with rage now. You're just a gold digger who married my dad, and now you won't even do one nice thing for his real daughter. You're nothing but a mean, stingy, pathetic woman who thinks she's so special because she has some old designer dress. Tears were streaming down her face as she grabbed her purse from the floor. Her mascara was running, leaving black streaks down her cheeks. Jessica, please sit down. Let's talk about this rationally. Rational? You want rational? She was screaming so loud now that I was sure the neighbors could hear. How's this for rational? I hate you. I've always hated you, and now I know I was right about you all along." She stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard that the pictures rattled on the walls. I sank back onto the couch, my hands shaking. In 3 years of dealing with Jessica's cold shoulder, I'd never seen her lose control like that. I spent the next few hours in a daze, replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. When I heard Robert's key in the lock that evening, my stomach clenched. I knew what was coming. He didn't even take off his coat. "What the hell did you do to my daughter?" "Robert, please let me explain." "Explain what?" He threw his briefcase on the chair. "How you made my little girl cry. How you couldn't do one simple thing for her." I took a deep breath. "It's not simple, and you know it. That dress has been promised to Emily since she was a child. It's been our special thing for 25 years. Jessica is your family now too." Robert's voice rose. "Or at least she's supposed to be. She's my daughter, Dorothy." "My daughter? And you treat her like she's nothing? That's not fair." I felt tears pricking at my eyes. I've tried so hard with Jessica. For 3 years, I've tried. But this isn't about accepting her. This is about a promise I made to my daughter long before I even met you. "It's just a dress," Robert shouted. "One day. That's all she's asking for." "It's not just a dress," I was shouting now too. "It's a symbol of everything I promised my daughter. It's about her childhood dreams, about the tradition we planned together. How can you not see that? All I see is my wife refusing to do something nice for my daughter. Something that would make her happy on the most important day of her life. And what about Emily? What about her happiness? Does that matter to you at all?" Robert's face hardened. "Emily isn't my daughter." Those 4 words hung in the air between us like poison. We stared at each other across the living room, both breathing hard, both realizing we'd crossed a line we couldn't easily come back from. The silence in our apartment was deafening for the next few days. Robert slept in the guest room, and we performed an awkward dance of avoiding each other, taking turns in the kitchen, waiting until the other person left a room before entering. The weight of unspoken words hung heavy between us. One evening, as I was making dinner, Robert came into the kitchen and stood there, looking tired and worn. Neither of us spoke for a moment, just listening to the sound of pasta boiling on the stove. "Robert," I finally said, turning down the heat. "I think I have a solution." He looked at me warily, but pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. It was the first time we'd properly faced each other in days. "There's this seamstress I know, Maria Rodriguez. She's incredible, one of the best in the city. She could make Jessica a dress that's inspired by mine. Same style, same elegance, but uniquely hers." Robert's expression softened slightly, so I continued. "Maria uses the finest materials, French lace, Italian silk. She's made dresses for some of the wealthiest families in town. My friend Sarah's daughter had her make her wedding dress last year, and it was absolutely stunning. Everyone at the wedding thought it was a designer piece." "How much would something like that cost?" Robert asked, his voice less harsh than it had been in days. "Don't worry about that," I said quickly. "I want to pay for it. It would be my wedding gift to Jessica. I really want to make this right, Robert. I want to show Jessica that I care about her happiness too." I could see hope flickering in Robert's eyes. He reached for his phone. "Let me call her right now. This could work. This could really work." I held my breath as he dialed Jessica's number and put it on speaker. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Dad? Honey, listen. Dorothy has a great idea. There's this amazing seamstress who could make you a dress just like." "Are you kidding me?" Jessica's voice cut through the kitchen like a knife. "A knockoff? You want me to wear some cheap copycat dress made by some random local seamstress?" "Jessica, she's actually very well known," I tried to interject. "Shut up," she screamed through the phone. "I don't want to hear your voice. I want the dress. The designer dress. Not some pathetic imitation from some nobody dressmaker. Sweetheart, just listen, Robert attempted. No, you listen. I need that dress. That exact dress. I'm not walking down the aisle in some bargain basement reproduction. God, I can't believe you're even suggesting this. Jessica, please. This is insulting. I'd rather wear a trash bag than some fake version of that dress. Don't call me back unless you're going to tell me I can have the real thing. The call ended abruptly, leaving Robert and me sitting in stunned silence at our kitchen table. The pasta was boiling over on the stove, but neither of us moved to turn it off. The next morning, I was making coffee when Robert's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and immediately put it on speaker. Hi, Dad, Jessica's voice filled the kitchen. She sounded calmer than yesterday, almost calculated. I'd been thinking about this whole situation. Robert shot me a hopeful look. Yeah? What's on your mind, sweetheart? Well, since your wife is being so difficult about the dress, I noticed how she refused to use my name. I found another solution. I found this amazing designer dress. It's perfect, actually better than that old one she's hoarding. That's great, honey, Robert smiled. Problem solved then? Almost. It's $20,000. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. I figure since she won't give me the dress, you can just give me the money instead. It's only fair, right? I watched Robert's face carefully, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he was nodding thoughtfully. Let me think about it, honey. We might be able to work something out. That's when I lost it. Are you out of your mind? I exploded. $20,000? 20,000? Robert covered the phone with his hand. Dorothy, please. No, you please. I was shaking with anger now. You're already paying for her entire wedding. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. And the 2-week honeymoon in the Maldives. Have you completely lost your mind? Jessica's voice came through the speaker. Oh great, she's there. Always trying to control everything. This is insane, I continued. This isn't about the dress anymore. This is emotional manipulation, and you're falling for it. Robert's face darkened. None of this would be happening if you'd just given her the dress in the first place. One day, Dorothy. That's all she wanted, one damn day. Oh, so this is my fault? Your daughter throws a tantrum and demands $20,000, but somehow I'm the unreasonable one? Yes, it is your fault. He was shouting now too. You're the one who started all of this. You're the one who couldn't make one small sacrifice for my daughter's happiness. Small sacrifice? You want me to betray a promise I made to my daughter 25 years ago, and you call that a small sacrifice? Dad, Jessica's voice cut in, are you going to let her talk to you like this? Something snapped inside me. Without another word, I walked to our bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. Robert followed me. What are you doing? What does it look like? I started throwing clothes into the suitcase. I'm leaving. I'm going back to my old apartment. You're being ridiculous. No, what's ridiculous is that you can't see what's happening here. What's ridiculous is that you're willing to throw away our marriage over a spoiled tantrum and $20,000. Dorothy, stop. But I was already zipping up the suitcase. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and walked to the door. The last thing I heard as I left was Jessica's voice from the phone. Dad? Are you still there? About that money. I hadn't planned on looking at Jessica's wedding photos. In fact, I'd been avoiding social media entirely since I moved back to my old apartment. But one evening, after a glass of wine, curiosity got the better of me. The photos appeared perfect, of course. Jessica stood beaming in a clearly expensive dress, all lace and crystals, probably worth every penny of that $20,000. Her father stood proudly beside her, and I felt a pang in my chest seeing Robert in his tuxedo, smiling like nothing was wrong in the world. Then I saw Jessica's caption beneath the main photo collection. The most perfect day of my life. My heart is so full knowing that everyone who truly loves me was there to share this magical moment. No drama, no negativity, just pure joy and love. So grateful that nobody who wanted to spoil this special day was present. Perfect wedding, true love, family first. My fingers tightened around my wine glass as I read it. The dig was obvious, subtle enough to seem innocent to outsiders, but clear as day to me. What hurt more than her words, though, was seeing Robert's like on the post. He knew exactly what she meant, and he'd endorsed it. 2 months crawled by. I threw myself into helping Emily with her wedding preparations, grateful for the distraction. She'd sent Robert an invitation, complete with a handwritten note telling him how much his presence would mean to her. He never responded. The morning of Emily's wedding dawned bright and clear. As I helped her into my dress, our dress, I couldn't hold back my tears. "Mom, don't cry," Emily laughed, though her eyes were wet too. "You'll ruin your makeup." "Happy tears, baby," I assured her, adjusting the vintage lace around her shoulders. "Just happy tears." The dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been made for this moment. The same dress I'd worn 25 years ago, the one she'd played dress-up in as a little girl. Seeing her in it now, radiant and grown up, made every bit of drama worth it. "I can't believe I'm finally wearing it for real," she whispered, turning to look in the mirror. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered." The ceremony was everything we'd dreamed it would be. Emily practically floated down the aisle, the vintage silk rustling softly with each step. Mark's face when he saw her, that look of pure love and awe, made my heart soar. I kept glancing at the empty seat where Robert should have been, but I refused to let his absence dim the joy of the day. This was Emily's moment, the fulfillment of a childhood dream, and nothing could spoil that. During the reception, I watched my daughter twirling on the dance floor in my dress, laughing and happy, surrounded by people who truly loved her. No snide comments, no hidden agendas, no drama, just pure, uncomplicated joy. It's been 4 months since Emily's wedding. The seasons have changed, leaves have fallen, and my old apartment feels both familiar and strange. Sometimes I wake up reaching for Robert's side of the bed, only to remember he isn't there. Hasn't been there for months now. Last week, I finally packed away my own wedding photos, the ones from that simple ceremony at City Hall with Robert. They'd been sitting in a drawer since I moved back here, like a question I wasn't ready to answer. As I tucked them into a box, I found myself wondering if he ever thinks about that day, about how happy we were before a wedding dress of all things tore us apart. Emily visits often. She and Mark are settling into married life beautifully, and seeing her happiness helps confirm that I made the right choice. Yesterday, over coffee, she asked if I regretted not giving Jessica the dress. No, I told her honestly. Some promises need to be kept, no matter the cost. She squeezed my hand and said, "I'm sorry it cost you your marriage, Mom." But did it? Was it really the dress that ended things, or did it just expose cracks that were already there? Robert and I haven't spoken since Emily's wedding. No calls, no texts, not even through lawyers. Just silence. He hasn't made a single attempt to reach out, to try to understand my side of things, to find a way forward together. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I imagine him picking up the phone, finally ready to talk. I picture us working through this, finding our way back to each other. After all, we did love each other once, deeply, genuinely. Part of me still does. But I won't be the one to make that first call. I offered solutions. I tried to compromise. I even offered to pay for a beautiful custom-made dress for Jessica. What more could I have done? Some might say I'm being stubborn, that pride isn't worth losing a marriage over. But this isn't about pride, it's about standing up for what's right, about keeping your word, about teaching your children that their dreams and feelings matter. The wedding dress hangs in Emily's closet now, wrapped in tissue paper and memories. Sometimes I think about how something so beautiful, something meant to symbolize love and tradition, became the catalyst for so much pain. But then I remember Emily's face when she wore it, the way she glowed walking down the aisle, and I know I'd make the same choice again. Maybe someday Robert will understand that. Maybe someday he'll realize that true love means supporting each other's principles, not just giving in to demands. Maybe someday we'll find our way back to that simple happiness we had before. But until then, I'll be here in my old apartment, living with my choice. Because sometimes doing the right thing means walking a lonely path. And sometimes love means knowing when to stand your ground, even if it means standing alone. I never had that special sisterly bond you see in movies or read about in books. Jessica was already 10 years old when I came along, practically a different generation. While she was experiencing her first crushes in high school, I was still playing with dolls. Our parents, like many who have children far apart, seemed to hold a special place in their hearts for their firstborn. Jessica could do no wrong in their eyes, and that pattern continued well into our adult years. When I turned 18 and started college in our hometown, Jessica was getting married to David, a local accountant she'd met at church. I remember her wedding day clearly. She was glowing with happiness, and our parents couldn't stop crying tears of joy. I was just relieved I could live at home while attending college, to save money. Little did I know what that decision would cost me. Jessica wasted no time settling into her role as a housewife. Within months of the wedding, she announced her pregnancy. "Isn't it wonderful, Robin?" she gushed. "You're going to be an aunt." I smiled and nodded, not realizing this announcement would completely derail my college experience. 3 months after little Tommy was born, Jessica started showing up at our parents' house unannounced. "I just need a break," she'd say, practically throwing Tommy into Mom's arms. "I'll be back in a few hours. Robin's home anyway, she can help." I'd be in my room, surrounded by textbooks and notes, when Mom would knock on my door. "Robin, honey, could you watch Tommy while I make dinner?" It became a daily routine. My study time was constantly interrupted by a crying baby and my mother's gentle but persistent requests for help. I tried to balance everything, but it was exhausting. Then, just when I thought I had somewhat adjusted to the situation, Jessica dropped another bombshell during Sunday dinner. "We're having another baby," she announced. "Tommy's going to be a big brother." 2 years later, I was in my final year of college, trying desperately to prepare for my exams while dealing with both 3-year-old Tommy running wild through the house and baby Michael screaming at the top of his lungs. "Jessica," I said one afternoon, after she'd dropped both kids off so she could go to the movies with her friends, "have you considered hiring a babysitter?" She looked at me like I'd suggested she sell her children. "Do you know how expensive babysitters are these days?" she scoffed. "Besides, why should we pay someone when we have family who can watch them for free?" Our mother, who was currently chasing Tommy as he ran through the house with her reading glasses, just nodded absently. Of course she didn't mind. Jessica was her precious firstborn, and she'd never deny her anything. Meanwhile, our house had turned into complete chaos. Tommy treated every room like his personal playground, leaving a trail of destruction wherever he went. One morning, I woke up to find he'd emptied all my college folders onto the floor and used my notes as drawing paper. Baby Michael's piercing screams provided a constant soundtrack to the mayhem. "Robin," Mom called out one afternoon, her voice strained. "Please come help with the boys. I can't handle them anymore today." I heard something crash downstairs, followed by Tommy's gleeful giggling. "I can't, Mom," I shouted back through my locked door. "I have finals next week." "You're being selfish." Dad's voice joined the chaos. "These are your nephews. Family helps family." I turned up my music to drown out their voices and the sound of another crash downstairs. My hands were shaking as I highlighted important passages in my textbook. I felt guilty, but I also knew that if I didn't pass these exams, my whole future would be affected. The next few weeks were tense, but I managed to graduate with honors, despite the constant disruptions. My first priority after securing a job at Anderson & Associates was finding my own place. The starting salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to rent a small one-bedroom apartment across town. That first night in my apartment was the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. No screaming, no crying, no chaos, just blessed silence. 2 years passed, and I'd managed to create a comfortable life for myself. Then came the news of Jessica's third pregnancy. "It's another boy," Mom told me during one of our weekly phone calls. "Isn't it wonderful?" "Yeah, wonderful," I said, already imagining the increased chaos. "How are you and Dad handling Tommy and Michael these days?" Mom sighed. "They're energetic. Jessica still brings them over every weekend. Says she needs a break. Now with another baby coming." Her voice trailed off, and I could hear the exhaustion she was trying to hide. During my next visit home, I found my parents looking older than their years. Tommy and Michael were racing through the house, playing some game that seemed to involve throwing all the couch cushions on the floor. Jessica had just dropped them off before heading to brunch with friends. "Mom, Dad," I said carefully, watching them chase after the boys, "you know you don't have to do this, right? You can say no to Jessica." Dad turned to me, his face red with either exertion or anger. "That's such a selfish thing to say, Robin. This is what family does." "There's nothing selfish about setting boundaries," I argued. "You both look exhausted." "You don't understand what family means," Mom snapped, even as she picked up another cushion from the floor. "You've never understood. When you have children of your own, you'll get it." I left their house that day feeling frustrated and sad. It seemed like nothing had changed. Jessica was still taking advantage, our parents were still enabling her, and I was still the bad guy for pointing out the obvious. Over time, my weekend visits home became increasingly difficult to endure. Each time I walked through my parents' door, I found myself stepping into what felt like a war zone. Tommy, now 5, and Michael, 3, had developed a particularly nasty habit of turning mealtimes into food fights, with 6-month-old Kevin, their youngest brother, usually ending up as their unwilling target. One Sunday lunch was especially horrible. I watched in horror as Tommy loaded his spoon with mashed potatoes and launched it across the table at Michael, who retaliated with a handful of green peas. Kevin, caught in the crossfire, ended up with baby food dripping down his face, sobbing while his older brothers laughed. I couldn't take it anymore. "Enough." I slammed my hand on the table, making everyone jump. "Tommy, Michael, get over here right now." They stared at me, unused to being confronted. "Look at this mess you've made," I pointed to the food-splattered floor and walls. "And look at your brother crying. This is unacceptable. You're going to clean this up, now." To everyone's surprise, including my own, they actually started cleaning. Maybe it was the shock of someone finally standing up to them. That's when Jessica burst through the door, returning from her weekly spa appointment. "What's going on here?" she demanded, seeing her older boys on their hands and knees wiping the floor. "They made a mess at lunch," I explained. "They're cleaning it up." Jessica's face turned red. "How dare you? They're just children. You're being cruel to them." "Cruel?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Jessica, they were throwing food at Kevin. He was crying. This isn't okay behavior." "You don't have children," she spat. "You don't understand anything." I looked at our parents, hoping they'd back me up, but they just sat there, looking tired and defeated. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't stand up to Jessica, why they kept letting her take advantage of their kindness. Life went on like this for 3 more years, with me limiting my visits home to avoid the chaos. Then everything changed when I met James. He was nothing like anyone I'd dated before. Smart, kind, and most importantly, he understood the importance of boundaries. We met at a coffee shop near my office. He'd accidentally taken my latte, and we ended up talking for hours. After 6 months of dating, we introduced each other to our families. His parents, Robert and Diana, were lovely people who raised their voices about as often as they burned dinner, which was never. The contrast between their peaceful home and my parents' chaos was striking. Christmas had always been a big deal in our family, and this year was supposed to be extra special since James and I were newly engaged. Mom went all out with the decorations. The tree was beautiful, presents were wrapped perfectly in matching paper, and the house smelled amazing with all her holiday baking. When James and I arrived early to help, the atmosphere was festive and warm. My cousins Mark and Sarah were already there with their kids, who were quietly playing board games in the corner. Several of our relatives had traveled from out of town, including Great-Aunt Martha, who immediately pulled me into a tight hug. "Let me see that ring, dear," she said, admiring my engagement ring. "James is such a lovely young man. You two will be so happy together." Everything was picture perfect. Mom had outdone herself with the food, Dad was telling his favorite stories, and even the kids were well behaved, saying please and thank you when offered cookies. It felt like a scene from a Christmas movie. Then the front door burst open. "Merry Christmas!" Jessica's voice rang out, but it was immediately drowned by the sound of her 3 boys storming into the house like a hurricane. Tommy, now 8, immediately ran straight into Great-Uncle George, nearly knocking him over. Michael, 6, started chasing his cousins, who had been quietly reading on the couch. 3-year-old Kevin was screaming at the top of his lungs, for no apparent reason. "Boys will be boys," Jessica laughed, while her husband David stared at his phone, completely checked out of the situation. Before anyone could stop them, Tommy and Michael discovered the presents under the tree. They didn't just look at them or shake them, they started ripping them open. All of them. Even the ones that weren't for them. "Oh my goodness," Great-Aunt Martha gasped as Tommy tore through a carefully wrapped package meant for my cousin's daughter. "I think I need to leave. This is too much excitement for me." She wasn't the only one. Within 20 minutes, half of our elderly relatives had made their excuses and left, unable to handle the chaos that my nephews were creating. The dinner that followed was even worse. My cousin's children sat quietly, using their napkins and waiting their turns to speak. In stark contrast, my nephews turned the dinner table into a battlefield. Tommy and Michael were throwing dinner rolls at each other across the table, while Kevin was smearing cranberry sauce in his hair. "Children, please," Mom pleaded weakly, but they ignored her completely. The breaking point came when Tommy, with a mischievous grin, deliberately picked up his can of soda and poured it all over Mom's special Christmas pie, the one she'd spent hours making that morning. "Tommy," several voices shouted at once. But Jessica just laughed. "He's just being playful," she said, while David continued scrolling on his phone. I looked around the table at my relatives' faces, the shock, the disapproval, the discomfort, while my sister and her husband sat there acting like this was perfectly normal behavior. I couldn't take it anymore. The sight of my mother's ruined pie, the chaos, the complete lack of discipline, it was all too much. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I can't stay here," I announced, my voice shaking with anger. "This is ridiculous. Your children are behaving disgustingly, Jessica, and you're doing nothing about it." The table fell silent, except for the sound of Kevin banging his spoon against his plate. Jessica's face turned red. "Oh, that's rich coming from you," she snapped. "You don't have children, Robin. You have no idea how hard it is to raise kids. When you have your own, then you can judge my parenting." I let out a bitter laugh and gestured toward my cousin's children, who were sitting quietly, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Really? Then how do you explain them? Sarah and Mark's kids have been perfectly well behaved all day. They use their manners, they don't destroy things, they don't throw food. How is that possible if children are supposedly impossible to control?" "Those kids are just different," Jessica sputtered. "No, the difference is that Sarah and Mark actually parent their children," I shot back. "When was the last time you made your kids face any consequences for their actions?" Jessica's eyes welled up with tears. "You're so cruel. You've always hated my children." "I don't hate them," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I hate watching them grow up without any guidance or discipline. I hate seeing Mom and Dad's house destroyed every time you visit. I hate that you think this behavior is normal." James stood up beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I think we should go," he said quietly. Jessica was full-on crying now, while her boys continued their chaos, completely unfazed by the drama unfolding around them. David finally looked up from his phone, seeming mildly annoyed by the disruption. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said, my voice thick with sarcasm. "Sorry, Mom, but I just can't watch this anymore." James and I left to the sound of Jessica's sobs and Tommy's triumphant yell as he launched another dinner roll across the room. 2 months later, we were sitting in our apartment, working on the wedding guest list. The Christmas disaster was still fresh in our minds as we looked at the names. "We can't invite the boys," I said finally, voicing what we were both thinking. "They'll ruin everything." "Can you imagine them during the ceremony? During the reception?" James nodded. "What if we just make it completely child-free? No kids under 16, period. That way it's not personal, it's just a blanket policy." "You don't think people will be offended?" "Some might be," he admitted. "But if it applies to everyone equally, it's harder to argue with. Sarah and Mark might be disappointed their kids can't come, but at least they'll understand it's not targeted at them specifically." I thought about the peaceful ceremony we'd been planning. No chaos, no food fights, no screaming children. Just an elegant celebration of our love, surrounded by mature guests who could actually appreciate the moment. "A child-free wedding," I repeated, trying out the words. "You know what? I actually love it." I chose a Sunday afternoon to break the news to my family. In retrospect, maybe I should have done it when Jessica and her kids weren't there, but finding them absent from our parents' house was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. As soon as I walked in, I had to dodge a remote control flying through the air, thrown by Tommy while chasing Michael. Kevin was crying on the floor because his brothers had knocked over his blocks for the 3rd time. "Mom, Dad," I started, raising my voice over the chaos. "Jessica, I need to talk to you all about the wedding." "Sure, honey," Mom said, trying to clean up juice that Kevin had spilled on the carpet. I took a deep breath. "James and I have decided to make the wedding child-free. No children under 16 will be attending." The chaos stopped for approximately 2 seconds before Jessica erupted. "What?" she screamed, jumping up from the couch. "You can't do that." "What about my boys?" "The policy applies to all children," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "Not just yours. This is because you hate them." Jessica was turning red now, her voice getting louder with each word. "You've always hated my children. You're a horrible aunt, a horrible sister." "No, I love your boys," I insisted, even as Tommy chose that moment to knock over a vase. "But you saw what happened at Christmas. The food fights, the presents being torn open, the ruined pie. That was just kids being kids." "No, Jessica, it wasn't. Mark and Sarah's kids were there too, remember? They didn't destroy anything. They didn't ruin Christmas for everyone else." "Oh, here we go again with the perfect cousins' perfect children," Jessica screamed. "Well, you know what? You won't have to worry about my disruptive children at your precious wedding, because we won't be there at all." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "That's your choice," I said quietly. "If you'd rather not come to my wedding than attend without your children, that's up to you." Jessica stared at me for a moment, her mouth open in shock. Then she started gathering her kids' things, shoving toys into bags. "Come on, boys," she yelled. "We're leaving. Your Aunt Robin doesn't want you in her life anymore." "That's not what I said," I started, but she was already herding the boys toward the door. "I hope you're happy with your perfect, quiet wedding," she spat over her shoulder. Then she slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. After Jessica stormed out, I turned to my parents, expecting to find understanding in their faces. After all, they'd been dealing with my nephew's chaos for years. Instead, I found them looking at me with disappointment. "How could you, Robin?" Mom's voice was quiet but sharp. "Those are your nephews." "Mom, you've seen how they behave," I said, incredulous. "You saw what happened at Christmas." "They're just children," Dad jumped in. "You're being incredibly selfish." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Selfish? How is it selfish to want my wedding day to be peaceful? One day that I want to be perfect, without food fights or screaming or chaos. Dad's face hardened. Then you need to reconsider your decision. Either invite your nephews, or we won't be attending either. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at their faces, these parents who had watched their house be destroyed countless times, who looked older than their years from the stress of handling 3 unruly boys, who were now threatening to miss their younger daughter's wedding because she wanted one peaceful day. Fine, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. That's your choice. Don't come. I left their house and drove straight to James's place. When I told him and his parents what had happened, they immediately rallied around me. You're absolutely right to want a peaceful wedding, Diana, my future mother-in-law, assured me. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about that. That evening, I made it official. I posted the announcement on Facebook. James and I are excited to announce that our wedding will be a child-free celebration. We look forward to sharing our special day with our adult guests in an elegant, peaceful atmosphere. The support was overwhelming. Cousins, friends, and even distant relatives liked and commented with their approval. Sarah, my cousin, wrote, "Completely understand. We'll arrange a sitter for the kids. Can't wait to celebrate with you." Then Jessica commented, "Shame on you, Robin. You're tearing this family apart with your selfishness. You've always been jealous of my children and now you're excluding them from this important family event. I hope you're happy with yourself." The response was immediate and unexpected. Relatives who had witnessed the Christmas disaster jumped to my defense. "Jessica, your kids destroyed the Christmas celebration," Aunt Linda wrote. "They ruined presents that weren't theirs, threw food, and drove half the family to leave early. Maybe instead of attacking Robin, you should focus on teaching your children how to behave in public," Great Aunt Martha chimed in. Comment after comment appeared, each one recounting another instance of my nephew's bad behavior and Jessica's lack of parenting. The post turned into a catalog of years of chaos and destruction, all of which Jessica had dismissed or ignored. Jessica's responses stopped abruptly. For once, she had nothing to say in defense of her children's behavior, perhaps because, for the first time, she was facing unified opposition from the entire family. My phone rang 3 days after the Facebook post explosion. When I saw Mom on the caller ID, my stomach tightened, but I answered anyway. "Robin?" Mom's voice was soft. "Your father and we saw your post." And all the comments. We had no idea so many people felt this way. Seeing everyone describe what happened at Christmas, and all the other occasions. "We'll be at your wedding, honey," Dad chimed in. "With or without your sister. You deserve your perfect day." The relief was overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed to say through my tears. "That means everything to me." After that conversation, I sent Jessica and David a formal wedding invitation with a handwritten note. "I would love to have you both there to celebrate with us. I know it's difficult without the boys, but this is important to me. Love, Robin." Weeks passed without a response. As the RSVPs rolled in, Jessica's silence became her answer. The wedding day itself was everything I'd dreamed of. The ceremony was peaceful and elegant, without a single interruption. During the reception, adults could actually have conversations without shouting over chaos. No food was thrown, no decorations were destroyed, no one cried except my mom, happy tears as she watched us exchange our vows. "This is lovely," Great Aunt Martha told me during the reception. "So dignified, so peaceful." James squeezed my hand under the table. He knew I was thinking about the empty seats where Jessica and David should have been. A week after we returned from our honeymoon, Mom called with news. "Jessica hasn't brought the boys over since your wedding," she said. "I tried to call her, but she won't answer." "She's punishing you for coming to my wedding," I said quietly. "Maybe," Mom sighed. "But you know what? For the first time in years, your father and I feel rested. Our house is still clean at the end of the day. Maybe this isn't entirely a bad thing." I understood what she meant. Sometimes relationships need to break before they can be rebuilt properly. Perhaps this was our family's breaking point, the moment when we finally stopped pretending everything was fine and acknowledged the problems that had been growing for years. I still hope that one day Jessica will understand that my wedding wasn't about excluding her children, it was about having one day of peace. I hope she'll realize that her boys' behavior isn't normal or acceptable, and that letting them run wild isn't doing them any favors. I hope that someday we can rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Until then, I have my memories of a perfect wedding day, surrounded by people who understood and supported my choice. I have my new husband and his loving family. And I have the knowledge that sometimes standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts, is the right thing to do. My name is Grace, and for 18 years, I lived with my parents, Lisa and Robert, in a modest two-story house in Minneapolis. We weren't the kind of family that had movie nights or went on exciting vacations, but I figured that was just how my parents were: practical, reserved, focused on work and everyday routines. Mom worked as an accountant, spending her evenings with spreadsheets and calculator in hand. Dad was in sales, always on the phone closing deals or preparing presentations. They provided for me, kept me fed and clothed, helped with homework when I asked. But there was always this distance. No warm hugs, no I love yous, thrown around casually like I saw in other families. I told myself it was just their way, that not every family had to be all touchy-feely to be good. "Grace, honey, we need to talk to you after dinner," Mom said on the morning of my 18th birthday. Her tone was unusually serious, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe they had planned something special, though they'd never really made a big deal out of birthdays before. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table, picking at the remains of my birthday dinner, takeout pizza, my choice. Mom had barely touched her slice, and Dad kept checking his phone, something clearly on his mind. "So, Grace," Dad finally spoke, putting his phone down. "Your mother and I have been planning something for a while now, and since you're 18 today, it's time we told you." I perked up, expecting maybe news about college preparations, or perhaps even a surprise gift. What came next hit me like a bucket of ice water. "We're selling the house," Mom stated flatly. "Your father and I are moving to Europe. We're going to start our own business there." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. "Oh, okay. When are we leaving?" "I mean, I'll need to figure out about college applications and—" "No, Grace," Mom cut me off, her voice sharp. "We're moving. You're not coming with us." "What do you mean?" My voice came out small, childlike. "I don't understand." "You're 18 now," Dad explained, as if discussing a business transaction. "An adult. It's time for you to take care of yourself." I looked between them, my brain refusing to process what I was hearing. "But, what about college? I'm supposed to start in a few months." "We've been talking about it." "That's your responsibility now," Mom said, standing up to clear the plates. "To be honest, Grace, you've been a burden all these years. We've fed you, clothed you, supported you for 18 years. That's more than enough." The words hit me like physical blows. A burden? All these years? I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but Mom just continued loading the dishwasher as if she hadn't just shattered my entire world. "You can stay here until we sell the house," Dad added, his tone suggesting this was some kind of generous offer. "But the sooner you figure out your own situation, the better it will be for everyone." I sat there, frozen, as my parents discussed property values and moving logistics over my head. 18 years of memories suddenly shifted, transformed. Every quiet dinner, every missed school play, every brief good job instead of a hug, they weren't signs of restraint or different parenting styles. They were signs that my parents had been counting down the days until they could get rid of me. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My hands were trembling as I dialed Grandma Eleanor's number. She picked up on the second ring, her warm voice already making me feel a little less lost. "Gracie? Is everything okay, sweetheart? You never call this early." I could barely get the words out, But somehow I managed to tell her everything: the birthday dinner, their announcement, Mom calling me a burden. With each detail, I heard Grandma's breathing getting heavier on the other end of the line. "Those absolute," she muttered something under her breath I'd never heard her say before. Then, in a stronger voice, "Pack your bags, Gracie. You're coming to live with me. Right now." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my largest suitcase from the attic and started throwing in everything I could think of: clothes, photos, my laptop, the few pieces of jewelry I owned. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip the suitcase closed. Downstairs, Mom and Dad were still talking about property values. They barely looked up when I dragged my suitcase past them and out the door. No goodbye, no questions about where I was going. Nothing. Grandma was waiting on her front porch when I pulled into her driveway. She wrapped me in one of her bear hugs, the kind of hug I'd always wished I'd get from Mom, and led me inside the cozy house I'd visited so many times before. Over cups of her famous hot chocolate, with extra marshmallows, just like when I was little, Grandma laid out her plan. "First things first, you're going to college," she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I've got savings, and they're going to good use sending my grandbaby to school." "Grandma, I can't take your money." "You're not taking anything. I'm giving it." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "And there's something else you should know. I'm changing my will." I looked up, surprised. Grandma's expression was fierce. "This house, my savings, everything's going to you, Gracie. Not a single penny to your mother. This house isn't much, but it's paid for. The savings aren't millions, but they're enough. It'll all be yours." Later that evening, as we sat in her small but immaculate living room, Grandma brought up one more point. "We need to agree on something, Gracie," she said carefully. "I think it's best if we keep the details of all this between ourselves. No need to air dirty laundry to the rest of the family." I nodded, understanding immediately. "I don't want to talk about it anyway." "Good," Grandma said, patting my hand. "Let them think what they want. We know the truth, and that's what matters." College life fell into a comfortable routine. Each morning, I'd wake up to the smell of Grandma's coffee and the sound of her humming in the kitchen. We'd have breakfast together before I headed to my classes, and in the evenings, I'd tell her about my day while she worked on her crossword puzzles. Occasionally, relatives would drop by to visit Grandma. During one such visit, Aunt Sarah mentioned casually, "Oh, did you hear? Lisa and Robert finally made it to Europe. Opened some kind of business there, I hear." I just nodded and excused myself to study. I didn't want to know more. What was harder to handle were the comments about my independence. They came regularly, wrapped in admiration that made me want to scream. "You're such a strong young woman, Grace," Uncle Mike said during one visit. "Taking charge of your life, moving out on your own. Very mature of you." "It's admirable how you decided to make your own way," Cousin Rachel chimed in. "Not everyone your age would choose independence over living with their parents." Each time, I'd force a smile and change the subject. It didn't take long to figure out the story my parents had spun: their driven, independent daughter, so eager to strike out on her own that she'd moved out right after high school. It was easier to let everyone believe it. The truth hurt too much to share. Then came the worst day of my life. Grandma had been feeling tired for weeks, but we both brushed it off as just age catching up with her. By the time we realized it was more than that, it was too late. The doctor said words like aggressive and advanced stage, and before I knew it, I was holding her hand in a hospital room, watching her slip away. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Gracie," she whispered one night, her voice weak but her eyes clear. "Don't you ever forget that." She died 3 months later, a year before I was set to graduate. The funeral was small but well attended by family. Everyone came except my parents. Aunt Sarah told me they'd been informed but said they couldn't make it back from Europe on such short notice. I graduated with honors the following year, clutching my diploma and fighting back tears because the one person I wanted to see me walk across that stage wasn't there. But Grandma had prepared me for everything, even her absence. Thanks to her generosity, I had options. I used some of the inheritance to buy a lovely apartment closer to downtown, where I'd landed a job at Preston and Associates investment firm. I decided to keep her house and rent it out. I couldn't bear to sell it, but I also couldn't face living there without her. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. That's how I met James. He walked into the wrong conference room at Preston and Associates, looking for a client meeting that had been moved. Instead, he found me preparing for a presentation, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups. Either this isn't the Thompson meeting, or they've really changed their marketing strategy, he joked, gesturing at my chaos. I couldn't help but laugh. Next door. But hey, at least you found someone who appreciates a good coffee addiction. One coffee date led to another, and before I knew it, we were spending every free moment together. James was different from anyone I'd ever met, warm, genuine, and incredibly patient. When I finally told him about my parents one night, he just held me and listened, not trying to fix anything or offer empty platitudes. "You didn't deserve that," was all he said, wiping away my tears. Not any of it. A year and a half after that wrong turn into my conference room, James took me to dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date. He seemed nervous all evening, fidgeting with his napkin and checking his pocket every few minutes. When dessert arrived, I found a ring nestled next to my chocolate souffle, a stunning diamond that caught the candlelight and scattered it across our table. "I want to build a family with you," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "A real one, filled with all the love you should have had all along." I said yes through happy tears, and for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely whole. The next day, I posted a photo on social media, my hand with the ring, James hugging me from behind. "Said yes to forever with my best friend," I wrote, my heart so full of joy I thought it might burst. 2 days later, the message appeared in my inbox. My mother's name popped up, and my stomach lurched. "Dearest Grace, your father and I just saw your wonderful news. We are so incredibly happy for you. We know we have no right to ask this, but we've spent years regretting how we treated you. Not a day goes by that we don't think about our terrible mistakes. We'd love to come to your engagement party, to try to make amends. We understand if you say no, but we miss you so much. Love, Mom and Dad." I stared at the message until the words blurred. When James came home, I showed it to him, my hands trembling. "What do you think?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. James read the message twice, his arm around my shoulders. "I think it's entirely your decision. But if they've genuinely changed, if they're truly sorry, maybe they deserve a chance to prove it." I thought about Grandma, about what she would say. She'd probably tell me to be careful, but follow my heart. "Okay," I whispered, more to myself than to James. "One chance." I wrote back a short message. "The party is next Saturday at 7. You can come at 6 to talk first." My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I got ready that Saturday evening. James squeezed my shoulder and kissed my cheek before heading out to pick up the catering, leaving me alone to face my parents. At exactly 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find them standing there, Mom in an expensive-looking dress, Dad in a crisp suit. They looked exactly the same, yet somehow like strangers. "Grace, darling," Mom stepped forward for an awkward hug. I stood stiffly, letting her embrace me but not returning it. "You look wonderful. And what a lovely apartment." We moved to the living room, where they perched uncomfortably on the edge of my sofa. Dad commented on the decor, Mom asked about my job, both of them acting like we were distant acquaintances at a cocktail party rather than family. Then Dad cleared his throat, his pleasant expression dropping away like a mask. "Grace, let's cut to the chase. We know about your situation." "My situation?" I felt my stomach clench. "Yes," Mom leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "We know about Grandma's inheritance. The house, the savings, all of it. And we've done our research. What research? The house is worth at least $300,000 in today's market, she stated, like she was giving a business presentation. And knowing Mom, there must be significant savings too. Plus, we see you're doing very well, nice apartment, wealthy fiancé. Get to the point, I said, my voice trembling. We want $70,000, Dad announced flatly. It's less than we're entitled to, really, but we're being reasonable. I stared at them, speechless. Mom pulled out a small notebook. I've calculated everything. As Mom's daughter, I have a right to inherit. If you don't give us the money, we'll sue for half of everything, the house, the accounts, all of it. You can't be serious, I whispered. Oh, we are, Dad's voice hardened. And if you don't cooperate, we'll make sure everyone knows how you manipulated your grandmother. How you turned her against us, convinced her to cut out her own daughter. I never. It doesn't matter what really happened, Mom cut in. What matters is what people will believe. Do you want all your relatives to know how you schemed to get your grandmother's money? Want your new in-laws to hear about it? The doorbell rang again, early guests arriving. I stood up, feeling dizzy. I need time to think about this. Think fast, Dad stood, straightening his tie. We want an answer soon. They walked out just as James's parents walked in, all smiles and congratulations. I plastered on a fake smile and tried to focus on greeting guests, but my mind was spinning. As the apartment filled with cheerful voices and laughter, I felt like I was watching everything from underwater. The morning after the engagement party, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my phone. James had gone to work, but not before holding me close and whispering, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." My hands were steady this time as I dialed their number. Mom picked up on the first ring. Have you made your decision? No hello, no pleasantries. Yes, I took a deep breath. I'm not giving you any money. Grandma made her choice, and I'm honoring it. You'll regret this, she hissed and hung up. They didn't waste any time. That evening, my phone started buzzing with notifications. My parents had posted a lengthy message on social media, complete with sad-faced emojis and carefully filtered photos of them looking distressed. Our hearts are breaking, the post read. After losing everything in Europe, our home, our business, all our savings, we turned to our only daughter for help. But Grace, who was living in luxury with her wealthy fiancé, refused to help her own parents. We are now homeless, moving between relatives' homes, not knowing where we'll sleep next week. How did we raise such a heartless child? Within hours, the post had been shared throughout our entire extended family. My phone exploded with messages. Grace, how could you? Your own parents. They raised you for 18 years. You have plenty of money now, why can't you help them? Aunt Martha called me, sobbing. They need a place to stay, Grace. That house of your grandmother's is just sitting there with renters in it. Your own parents should be living there. Uncle Peter's message was particularly harsh. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. Your parents sacrificed everything for you. I wanted to scream, to tell them all the truth, but my throat felt closed up every time I tried to respond. Then came the wedding cancellations. I'm sorry, Grace, but I can't celebrate while your parents are suffering, Cousin Rachel texted. What kind of person starts a marriage by turning their back on family, wrote another relative. The final blow came from Uncle Mike, who'd always been kind to me at family gatherings. His message was brief and professional. Grace, as a lawyer, I feel obligated to inform you that I will be representing your parents in their lawsuit against you regarding your grandmother's estate. The law is clear about children's rights to inheritance, and your grandmother's will can be contested. Expect official documentation soon. I recommend you reconsider your position before this gets messy. You don't want to start your married life with a legal battle. Uncle Mike. I sat in my darkened apartment, reading and rereading the messages, watching as my entire extended family turned against me. The irony was almost funny. They were finally seeing me as the terrible person my parents had always thought I was, but for all the wrong reasons. James found me there when he got home, still scrolling through the endless stream of accusations and disappointment. He took one look at my face and pulled me into his arms. I sat at my computer, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Taking a deep breath, I began to type. To my family and friends. I've stayed quiet for 8 years about what really happened between my parents and me. I let everyone believe their version of events because the truth was too painful to share. But now I have no choice. On my 18th birthday, my parents sat me down and told me they were selling our house and moving to Europe. They informed me I wouldn't be coming with them. You've been a burden for 18 years, my mother said. That's more than enough. They refused to help with college, refused to support me in any way. I was given until the house sold to figure out my own situation. I didn't choose independence as they claimed. I was abandoned. Grandma Eleanor took me in that very night. She gave me a home, paid for my education, and showed me what unconditional love really means. Now my parents are back, demanding $70,000 and threatening to sue me for half of Grandma's inheritance. They're threatening to destroy my reputation if I don't comply. But Grandma, being the wise woman she was, saw this coming. My hands were shaking as I uploaded the video file beneath my post. Grandma's face filled the screen, looking tired but determined, sitting in her hospital room. Her lawyer, Mr. Thompson, was visible in the background. Lisa, Grandma began, addressing my mother directly. If you're watching this, it means you're trying to take what I left to Grace. I knew you would. You're my daughter, and I love you, but your greed has poisoned your heart. I, Eleanor Marie Sullivan, being of sound mind and clear judgment, am recording this message in the presence of my attorney. I want to state explicitly why I've chosen to leave everything to my granddaughter, Grace. 8 years ago, you and Robert threw your own child away like she meant nothing. You refused to help with her education, refused to give her any support. You called her a burden. A burden? Your own daughter, who I watched you bring into this world. Grace never told anyone what you did. She kept your secret, even when relatives praised you for raising such an independent daughter. She protected your reputation while you abandoned her. I'm leaving my house, my savings, and everything I own to Grace. Not because she manipulated me, as I'm sure you'll claim, but because she showed more character in her pain than you've shown in your entire life. This is my final decision, made with full mental capacity and witnessed by my lawyer. Grace is my sole heir. That's all I have to say. The video ended with Grandma's lawyer confirming the date and circumstances of the recording. I added a final line to my post. I've kept this video private for years, respecting Grandma's wishes to avoid family drama. But now that my parents are threatening legal action and spreading lies, I have no choice but to share the truth. I'm sorry you all had to find out this way. With trembling fingers, I clicked post. The responses started flooding in within minutes of my post. The first call came from Uncle Mike. Grace, his voice cracked. I had no idea. My God, I'm so sorry. I'm withdrawing from the case immediately. What they did to you? Aunt Sarah called next, sobbing. That birthday dinner. I remember bringing you a gift the next week, but your parents said you'd moved out. They seemed so proud of your independence. How could they? The family group chat exploded with messages of shock, support, and apologies. Cousin Rachel, who'd cancelled her RSVP just days ago, wrote a long message. I feel horrible about judging you without knowing the truth. Your parents painted such a different picture. Please tell me it's not too late to attend the wedding. I want to be there to support you. One by one, all the wedding cancellations were reversed. Relatives who'd condemned me just days before now reached out with heartfelt apologies and offers of support. Even distant family members I barely knew sent messages expressing their shock and sympathy. Your place card will be waiting, I told each one. No hard feelings. Through the grapevine, I heard snippets about my parents. They'd moved in with some old friends from their college days, picking up temporary work here and there. Mom was doing bookkeeping for small businesses, Dad taking whatever sales jobs he could find. Their grand European dreams had apparently crumbled long ago. Part of me expected to feel guilty about exposing them, about sharing Grandma's video. But sitting in my apartment the night before my wedding, looking at the photo of Grandma on my mantle, I felt only peace. "You were right, Grandma," I whispered to her picture. The truth did set me free. James found me there, wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. I thought about the scared 18-year-old girl I'd been, packing her bags in silence. About the grandmother who'd saved me with her love and foresight. About the woman I'd become, stronger, wiser, but no longer carrying the weight of other people's lies. "Not a single one," I replied, and I meant it. Tomorrow, I'll walk down the aisle surrounded by family who knows the real me, both the pain I've survived and the strength it gave me. My parents won't be there, but the empty seats won't matter. I have everything I need: love, truth, and finally, beautifully, peace. Some people might say I'm heartless for cutting my parents out of my life, for not helping them in their time of need. But I've learned that real family isn't about obligation or guilt, it's about love, support, and truth. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is simply let go. Growing up, I always knew I was the second choice. My name is Emma, and from my earliest memories, I watched my parents shower my older brother Michael with endless attention and opportunities while I stood in the shadows. The difference in how they treated us wasn't subtle, it was as clear as day. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, doing homework alone, while Mom and Dad drove Michael to his latest singing competition or club meeting. He was 3 years older than me, and somehow that made him more deserving of everything. Every time his teachers mentioned even the slightest talent, my parents jumped at the chance to nurture it, spending money we didn't really have on lessons and equipment. "Michael has such a beautiful voice," Mom would gush to anyone who would listen. "He's going to be something special one day." Meanwhile, I learned early on not to ask for much. When I showed interest in art classes, Mom just smiled apologetically. "Maybe next semester, honey. Michael's voice lessons are taking up the budget right now." The disparity became even more apparent during Michael's senior year of high school. I was 15 at the time, sitting quietly at dinner when my parents made their big announcement. "We've been saving up," Dad said proudly, "and we're going to send Michael to Preston College. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the state." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing." "And that's not all," Mom added. "You can stay in our apartment near the campus. No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." I pushed my peas around my plate, trying to hide my disappointment. Not that anyone was looking at me anyway. They were all focused on Michael's beaming face as he talked about his future plans. That night, lying in bed, I did the math. If they were spending this much on Michael's education and giving him a free apartment, there was no way they'd have anything left for my college fund. The realization hit me hard, but instead of crying, I started planning. The next day, I visited my grandparents' antique store. My grandfather listened as I explained my situation. "Well, Emma," he said, studying me carefully, "I could just give you the money for college." He paused, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "But I think it would be better if you earned it yourself. How would you like to work here after school?" So that's how it started. While Michael packed up for his prestigious college adventure, I began working at the antique store. Every afternoon after school, I'd help catalog items, assist customers, and learn the business from my grandfather. My grandmother would bring me snacks and tell me stories about the vintage pieces we sold. My parents' reaction to my initiative was telling. When I told them about my job and my plans to save for college, they seemed relieved, almost grateful that I'd solved my own problem. 3 years of working at my grandparents' antique store flew by. Every afternoon spent dusting old furniture and organizing vintage jewelry had paid off. I'd saved enough money for college. When I graduated high school, there wasn't much fanfare, just a quiet dinner at home. But I didn't mind, I was proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. I enrolled in the local state college, choosing a practical business program that wouldn't drain my savings. The tuition was reasonable, and I even had some money left over. Living at home and taking the bus to campus wasn't glamorous, but it made financial sense. "Mom, Dad," I broached the subject one evening, "I've been thinking about getting a used car. It would make getting to classes easier." Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, Emma. We just don't have the money for that right now." Mom chimed in, "The bus system is perfectly fine. Lots of students use it." I bit my tongue, remembering how they'd helped Michael get his license and even contributed to his first car. But that was ancient history now. My first year of college passed quickly, and just as I was finishing my spring finals, our house erupted with excitement. Michael was graduating from Preston College. Mom and Dad threw him an elaborate celebration, inviting what felt like half the town. Our house was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors, all there to celebrate my brother's achievement. I was arranging appetizers in the kitchen when Michael made his grand entrance with a pretty blonde woman on his arm. Sarah, his college girlfriend. They were beaming as they walked into the room, hand in hand. "Everyone," Michael announced, commanding immediate attention, "Sarah and I have some exciting news. We're engaged." The room exploded with cheers and congratulations. Mom burst into tears of joy, and Dad clapped Michael on the back so hard I thought he might fall over. "But wait, there's more," Sarah added, her voice sweet as honey. "After the wedding, we'll be moving to Connecticut. My parents own a successful business there, and they want us to take it over." Mom's tears turned into full-on sobbing. "My baby boy, a successful businessman. That's my son," Dad proclaimed proudly. "Always knew you were destined for great things." I stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Nobody seemed to notice that I'd just finished my freshman year with a 4.0 GPA, or that I'd been working part-time at a local cafe while maintaining my studies. But I was used to it by now. The wedding preparations consumed the next year. While I focused on my studies, now in my third year, Mom and Dad threw themselves into planning the perfect wedding for their perfect son. They took out a substantial loan to cover everything: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band. Nothing was too good for Michael and Sarah. The wedding itself was exactly what you'd expect: extravagant, emotional, and all about Michael. I stood in my bridesmaid dress, which I had to pay for myself, watching my parents beam with pride as they danced with the happy couple. They'd spared no expense, even though I knew they'd be paying off the loan for years to come. After Michael and Sarah left for Connecticut, I stood in my cramped bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my textbooks. An idea struck me: the apartment where Michael had lived during college was now empty. It was perfectly located near campus, and it would give me some much-needed independence. I approached my parents that evening while they were watching TV. "Mom, Dad, since Michael's apartment is empty now, would it be okay if I moved in there?" They exchanged glances before Mom spoke. "Well, honey, you can move in, but you'll need to pay rent." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Rent? But Michael lived there for free. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. That was different. "We have the wedding loan to pay off now. We need the extra income." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm your daughter too," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I've never asked you for anything. I worked for my college money. I take the bus everywhere. Mom held up her hand to stop me. She and Dad had one of their silent conversations, the kind they used to have when deciding whether to spend money on another of Michael's activities. "Fine," Mom finally said. "We'll charge you half the normal rent." I wanted to argue more, but I knew this was the best offer I'd get. "Okay, I'll take it." That weekend, I moved into the apartment. It still had traces of Michael everywhere: holes in the walls from his college posters, water rings on the coffee table from his late-night study sessions. I took extra shifts at the cafe to cover the rent, often working until closing time. Between classes, studying, and work, I barely had time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur of textbooks, coffee shop aprons, and midnight study sessions. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. While my classmates' families planned parties and celebrations, my parents opted for a quiet dinner at home. They only invited my grandparents, no extended family, no friends, no elaborate catering like Michael's graduation. We sat around the dining room table, eating the lasagna I'd made myself. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Emma, dear, we're so proud of you," she said warmly. "Graduating with highest honors while working part-time, that's quite an achievement." Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed. Her face lit up as she read the message. "Oh, speaking of achievements," she interrupted, "Michael just texted. The business is doing wonderfully. He says they're expanding into 2 new locations." I watched as my graduation dinner turned into a celebration of Michael's success in Connecticut. My grandparents exchanged knowing looks, and Grandpa squeezed my shoulder supportively. My hard work in college paid off sooner than I expected. Within 2 weeks of graduation, I landed a position at Anderson & Mitchell, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The starting salary was better than I dared hope for, and I was thrilled to finally be starting my career. That excitement lasted exactly 3 days, until my parents found out about my salary. "Emma," Mom said during one of her unexpected visits to the apartment, "now that you're making good money, you should start paying the full rent amount." I stared at her, wondering if I'd heard correctly. "But we agreed on half." "That was when you were a student," she replied matter-of-factly. "You can afford it now." I wanted to point out that Michael had lived here for free even after getting a job, but I'd learned that comparing myself to my brother was pointless. The apartment's location was perfect, just a 10-minute walk from my office, so I reluctantly agreed. Life fell into a routine. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove my worth at the company. Every month, like clockwork, Mom would call. "Emma, dear, just reminding you about the rent. It's due on Friday. We're counting on that money." 3 years passed this way. I earned a significant promotion and raise, but I kept that information to myself. I'd learned my lesson: any hint of financial success would just lead to more demands from my parents. Through their occasional updates, I heard that Michael and Sarah had a baby boy. I'd seen pictures on social media, but hadn't visited. Our communication had dwindled to perfunctory birthday messages and holiday greetings. I was fine with that. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Emma?" Mom's voice was tight with tension. "We need to talk about your brother. There's been some trouble. The business, well, it's gone bankrupt. He had a terrible fight with Sarah's parents. They're furious about how he managed things. They're not speaking anymore." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was heading. "He's coming back home," she continued. "With Sarah and the baby." "Oh," I said carefully. "I assume he'll be staying with you and Dad?" "Actually," Mom paused. "That apartment you're in is quite large. He'll be staying there." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "What? Mom, this is my home. I've been living here for years." "Don't be dramatic, Emma. Your brother needs help. He doesn't have any money right now, so he'll stay there for free. You can keep paying the rent." "That's absurd," I protested. "If he's moving in, maybe I should just find my own place." "Don't you dare." Mom's voice turned sharp. "We need your rent money now more than ever. Michael's going through a rough time. You wouldn't want to make things harder for him, would you?" I shook my head in disbelief and hung up without another word. The moving day was worse than I'd imagined. Michael, Sarah, and their crying baby Tommy showed up with a mountain of luggage and baby equipment. Mom arrived to supervise the transition, which apparently meant making my life as uncomfortable as possible. "Emma, clear out your room," Mom directed, hands on her hips. "Michael and Sarah need it for Tommy's nursery." I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, my personal space for the past 4 years. What? Where am I supposed to sleep? The living room has a perfectly good couch, she replied, already starting to move my things. You can't be serious. I pay rent here, full rent, and you're putting me on the couch. Mom's expression hardened. Don't be selfish, Emma. Your brother has a baby. Babies need proper rooms. So I watched helplessly as my bedroom was transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, and all the other baby paraphernalia. My belongings were unceremoniously piled in a corner of the living room, which was now my bedroom. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Michael moped around the apartment all day, alternating between complaining about his in-laws and reminiscing about his glory days as a successful businessman. Sarah spent her time either crying or arguing with Michael about whose turn it was to change Tommy's diaper. The baby seemed to sense the tension and cried constantly. I'd come home from a long day at work to find dishes piled in the sink, toys scattered everywhere, and dirty laundry spilling out of the hamper. The first few times, I tried ignoring the mess, but the dirty dishes attracted ants, and the clutter made it impossible to relax in what was now my bedroom. So I cleaned, I cooked, I did laundry. And every meal I prepared mysteriously disappeared before I could eat it. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at work, I decided to extend an olive branch. Michael, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, we actually have some openings at my company. I could put in a good word for you with HR. The benefits are great, and the starting salary is decent. Michael looked up from his phone, his face twisting with indignation. An entry-level position? Are you kidding me? I'm a businessman, Emma, I don't do entry-level. I need an executive position, something worthy of my experience. Your experience running a business into the ground? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Michael's face turned red. You don't know anything about what happened. That was my in-laws' fault. They set me up to fail. He stormed off to his room, my old room, leaving me standing there, wondering how much longer I could live like this. 3 months into our forced cohabitation, I sat at my kitchen table, now covered in Tommy's dried baby food and Sarah's coffee rings, reviewing my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie, my expenses had nearly doubled since Michael and his family moved in. That was the final push I needed to call my parents. I rehearsed what I would say, determined to remain calm and rational. The phone conversation went about as well as expected. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about the living situation, I began. Michael and Sarah aren't contributing anything to the household expenses. They're eating all my food, using utilities I pay for, and... Emma, Mom cut me off, her voice sharp. I can't believe how selfish you're being. Your brother lost everything. His in-laws betrayed him. He has a baby to take care of. Dad's voice joined in from the background. You should be grateful you're in a position to help family. But that's just it, I pressed on. I'm not just helping, I'm carrying the entire financial burden. They don't buy groceries, they don't. Enough, Mom snapped. Your brother is going through a difficult time. This isn't forever. You need to be more understanding. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. I bookmarked several promising options, all within walking distance of my office. Just in case, I told myself. Just in case things get worse. Things got worse exactly 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my couch bed, trying to focus on work documents while Tommy wailed in the background and Michael and Sarah had their fourth argument of the day. The doorbell rang, and my parents walked in without waiting for anyone to answer. Mom had that look on her face, the one she used to get right before announcing Michael had been enrolled in another expensive program. Dad stood behind her, avoiding eye contact. Emma, we need to discuss the rent, Mom announced. I looked up from my laptop. I paid this month's rent on time, as always. Yes, but starting next month, we're doubling it. The room fell silent, even Tommy stopped crying. I stared at my mother, certain I had misheard. Double? But I'm already paying the full market rate. Mom gestured around the apartment. Well, now there are more people living here. More wear and tear on the property. More utilities being used. It's only fair that the rent reflects that. Fair? I couldn't help but laugh. How is it fair that I should pay double rent for being forced to sleep on a couch in my own living room? If anyone should pay more, it should be Michael. He's the one who... I'm not paying anything. Michael jumped up from his chair. This is ridiculous. I lost everything, and now you want me to pay rent? Of course not, sweetie, Mom soothed, before turning back to me with a harder expression. Emma, you have a good job. You can afford this. Your brother needs time to get back on his feet. I looked at each of their faces, Mom's stern expectation, Dad's awkward avoidance, Michael's entitled indignation, Sarah's smug satisfaction. 3 months of built-up frustration threatened to explode, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I simply nodded. Fine, I said quietly. Double rent starting next month. Mom's face broke into a satisfied smile. She and Dad left shortly after, clearly pleased with how smoothly their announcement had gone. They had no idea they'd just given me the push I needed to finally make my decision. Later that evening, while trying to read a book on my uncomfortable couch bed, I overheard Michael and Sarah talking in the kitchen. They were trying to whisper, but their excitement made them careless. Can you believe it? Sarah giggled. Your mom just told me they're going to give us half of Emma's rent money every month. Michael's smug reply made my blood boil. Of course they are. They understand we need help right now. Emma makes plenty of money, she can support us for a while. This is perfect, Sarah continued. We get to live here for free, and we'll even have spending money. Your sister doesn't need to know. I lay there, gripping my book so hard my knuckles turned white. All this time, I'd thought my parents were just being unfair, but this was a calculated scheme. They weren't just enabling Michael, they were actively planning to use me to fund his laziness. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the apartment listings I'd bookmarked. One caught my eye, a modern one-bedroom in a quiet building, actually closer to my office than the current apartment. The rent was exactly what I'd been paying before the proposed increase. I called the number immediately, trying to keep my voice down. Hi, I'm interested in the apartment on Cedar Street. Yes, I could come see it right now if that's possible. Perfect, I'll be there in 15 minutes. The apartment was everything I hoped for, clean, quiet, and Michael-free. I signed the lease on the spot and paid the security deposit with my emergency savings. Back at the apartment, I waited until everyone was asleep before quietly packing my essential belongings into 2 large suitcases. I left my furniture, it wasn't worth the hassle, and I could buy new pieces that didn't have memories of this mess attached to them. The next morning, I wheeled my suitcases to the door while Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying to. Going somewhere? He asked, barely looking up. Month-long business trip, I lied smoothly. Big project in our Cincinnati office. He just grunted, already uninterested. I moved into my new apartment that evening, ordering takeout and sitting on the floor of my empty living room. The silence was beautiful. No crying baby, no arguing couple, no guilt-tripping parents. Just peace. For the next month, I lived quietly in my new home. I bought a comfortable bed, a cozy couch that wasn't a bed, and kitchen supplies that only I would use. I cooked meals that stayed in my refrigerator until I ate them. I slept through the night without being awakened by Tommy's crying. Then, right on schedule, my phone rang with my mother's number. Emma, she snapped without preamble, why haven't you sent the full rent payment? We agreed on double, remember? I couldn't help but laugh. Actually, Mom, I know all about your little arrangement with Michael and Sarah. Were you planning to tell me that half my rent money was going straight into their pockets? That's none of your business. Your brother needs. No, Mom, I interrupted, still chuckling. What my brother needs is to grow up and take responsibility for once in his life. I've moved out, found my own place. The apartment is all yours and Michael's now." "You what?" she screeched. "You can't do this. We need that rent money." "Well, I'm sure Michael will step up and start paying rent now that he's had time to get back on his feet. I can't wait to see how that works out for you." There was a moment of silence on the phone after my declaration. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head as reality finally sank in. Their reliable source of income was gone, and all they had left was their unemployed son who had never paid a bill in his life. "Emma, sweetie," Mom's voice suddenly turned sugary sweet, a tone I recognized from childhood when she wanted something. "Let's not be hasty. We can work something out. What if we go back to the original rent amount? That was fair, wasn't it?" I settled deeper into my new couch, the one I'd picked out myself, in my own apartment, where no one could kick me out of my bedroom. "No, Mom, that's not going to happen." "But Emma, we're family. You can't just—" "Family?" I interrupted. "Is that what you call it when you scheme behind my back to funnel my money to Michael? When you kick me out of my own bedroom while I'm paying all the bills? When you've spent my entire life treating me like an ATM while treating Michael like royalty? That's not fair. We've always—" "Goodbye, Mom." I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. That was 6 months ago. My grandparents keep me updated on the situation, though I never ask. They just know I need to hear it, need to know I made the right choice. According to them, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy are still living in the apartment. They haven't paid a single month's rent. Mom and Dad are covering all the utilities, plus giving them spending money because the baby needs things. My brother still hasn't found a job. Apparently, there just aren't enough executive positions available for failed businessmen with a track record of bankruptcy. My new life is peaceful. I got another promotion at work, bought myself a car, and started taking evening classes for my MBA. My apartment is always clean, my food stays in my fridge until I want to eat it, and I sleep in my own bed every night. The other day, I ran into Sarah's cousin at the grocery store. She told me they're expecting another baby. I just smiled and wished them well, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents are probably already figuring out how to pay for another nursery. But that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. And it feels absolutely right. My name is Carol, and I'm 22 years old. I just graduated from college, and I've got a story to tell you about my house. Well, technically, my mother's house. Or it was, until she passed away from intestinal cancer 4 years ago and left it to me. Mom was always the planning type. Even before the cancer diagnosis, she made sure everything was in order. The house was hers free and clear. She'd bought it before she even met my dad, and thank God for that foresight. She made sure I knew about the will, too. "This way you'll always have a home," she told me, her voice steady, despite everything she was going through. Things weren't always this complicated. My parents' marriage lasted 10 years before Dad decided to leave us for another woman. I was 9 when he packed his bags. No drama, no fighting over custody or property, he just left. The only thing he agreed to was paying for my college education. He set up a special account and transferred the entire sum for my future studies right away. I guess that was his version of child support. Dad started a new family pretty quickly. His wife Linda had their daughter shortly after. She's 10 years younger than me. I'd visit sometimes, staying at their rented house, but it never felt right. Linda would be busy with my half-sister, cooing over her latest accomplishment or fixing her hair. Dad was always working, claiming he needed to provide for his family. Funny how I wasn't really included in that category anymore. "Carol, would you like to join us for dinner?" Linda would ask, but her tone always suggested she hoped I'd decline. We kept things cordial though, exchanging birthday cards, holiday greetings, the occasional forced family dinner. It was all very proper and polite, in that uncomfortable way that makes your skin crawl. Mom made good money as a senior accountant, so when the cancer hit, she could focus entirely on treatment. I was 14 when we got the diagnosis. She quit her job immediately to focus on fighting the disease. For 4 years, we lived between hospital visits and treatment sessions. Mom never complained, not once. She just kept fighting, kept planning, kept making sure I would be okay. But cancer doesn't care about plans. I was 18 when she died, just weeks before I was supposed to leave for college in another state. The grief hit me hard, I could barely function. That's when Dad surprised me by actually stepping up. He, Linda, and my half-sister moved in temporarily to help me cope with the loss. I was too numb to question it at the time, too grateful for any support I could get. "We'll help you through this," Dad said, putting his arm around my shoulders. Linda nodded along, trying to look sympathetic while my half-sister explored what was now my house. By the end of summer, I was faced with a dilemma. College was starting in a few weeks, and I had no idea what to do with Mom's house, my house now. I couldn't bear the thought of selling it, but leaving it empty for 4 years didn't seem smart either. That's when Dad came up with his proposal over breakfast one morning. "Carol," he said, pushing his coffee mug aside, "I've been thinking. What if we stayed here? We'd pay all the bills, maintain the place. You wouldn't have to worry about anything while you're at school." I looked at Linda, who was making pancakes at the stove. She turned around and smiled. "It would be good for all of us," she added. "Sophie's already enrolled in the local school, and the house would be well taken care of." It made sense. During the 2 months they'd been staying with me, things had been surprisingly okay. Linda had stopped being so distant, and Sophie, my half-sister, had actually started treating me like a real sister instead of some stranger who showed up occasionally. So I agreed. Looking back, it seemed like the perfect solution. I packed up Mom's personal things, keeping what I wanted and storing the rest in the attic. I left for college feeling confident about my decision. Over the next 4 years, I came home during holidays and summer breaks. Those visits were nice, actually. Linda would cook these big welcome home dinners. "I made your favorite lasagna," she'd say, as if she'd always known my favorites. Sophie would drag me to her room to show me her latest artwork or tell me about school drama. During Christmas breaks, we'd all decorate the tree together. Dad would lift Sophie to put the star on top, while Linda and I argued good-naturedly about whether tinsel was tacky or classic. We'd sit around drinking hot chocolate, and sometimes I could almost forget that this wasn't the family I started with. Summer visits were different, longer, more relaxed. Sophie and I would spend afternoons by the community pool, and I'd help her with her summer reading. Linda would invite me to her book club meetings, and we'd actually have fun dissecting whatever romance novel they'd chosen that month. "Your sister's so good with Sophie," I overheard Linda telling Dad one evening. "It's nice having her home." That made me feel warm inside, like maybe we really had become a proper family. I called regularly during semesters, weekly chats with Dad about my classes, catching up with Linda about house maintenance, "The roses you planted are blooming beautifully, Carol," and FaceTime sessions with Sophie, who kept me updated on her middle school adventures. Everything seemed perfect. We'd created this strange but functional family dynamic, built on the foundation of my mother's house. I never imagined it could all fall apart so quickly, but I guess that's the thing about houses. No matter how solid the foundation, you never know what's going on behind the walls. Finally, at 22, with my degree in hand and a job lined up back home, I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. I'd already accepted a position at Marshall & Brooks Financial in my hometown. They'd interviewed me via Zoom and offered me the job right away. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Or so I thought. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house on a sunny June afternoon. I stood there for a moment, taking in the familiar sight. Mom's rose bushes were in full bloom, though they looked different from how she used to maintain them. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and new curtains hung in the windows. Little changes that had happened while I was away at college. Wheeling my suitcases up the front walk, I reached for my keys with a smile, already imagining sleeping in my old room tonight. But when I tried to unlock the door, something was wrong. The key wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired from the journey, but no, the key definitely didn't fit. What the hell? I muttered, trying the key again before finally giving up and knocking on the door, loudly, since it was the middle of the day and they might be watching TV. Linda opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. She was wearing an apron and had flour on her hands, like she'd been baking. "Carol, what are you doing here?" I wheeled my suitcase inside, noticing Dad and Sophie in the living room, both looking equally startled by my appearance. Sophie was sprawled on the couch with her phone, while Dad sat in his favorite armchair, Mom's old armchair, actually, reading something on his tablet. "What do you mean? I live here," I said, looking around at what seemed like subtle changes to the living room decor. "Why were the locks changed?" Dad scratched his neck, that nervous habit he's had since forever. "Oh, that. Yeah, I changed them last month. For safety, you know. There were some break-ins in the neighborhood." "You could have told me," I said, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "Or sent me a new key. I mean, this is my house." "We weren't expecting you," Linda said carefully, her arms crossed over her chest. She'd wiped the flour off her hands and was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Why not? I graduated last week. I told you guys I was coming home to start my new job." I looked between them, feeling increasingly uneasy. Something was off about their reactions. Sophie had even put down her phone and was watching the scene unfold with an odd expression. "Carol," Dad cut in suddenly, standing up. "Can we talk in the office for a minute?" I followed him into Mom's old office, my office now, technically. The room still had Mom's degrees on the wall, her collection of financial reference books on the shelves. He closed the door behind us, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he turned to face me. "Listen, honey," he started, his voice low. "There's something you need to know. Linda, well, she thinks this house belongs to me." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What?" "I told her it was my house," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "That I gave it to your mother and you out of kindness after the divorce, and that after your mom passed, it reverted to me. She thinks you've just been living here because I allowed it." I must have stood there gaping at Dad for a full minute before finding my voice again. My first instinct was to storm out of the office and tell Linda everything. Now I understood her surprised look when I showed up. In her mind, I was just some freeloader trying to crash in their house. "I have to tell her the truth," I said, moving toward the door, but Dad caught my arm. "Please, Carol," he begged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just give me a little time. I'll find us a new place to live, I promise. I just need to figure out how to tell her without destroying our marriage." "Destroying your marriage?" I hissed. "What about what you're doing to me?" He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, holding them out like a peace offering. "These are for the new locks. Please, sweetheart. Just a few weeks, that's all I'm asking. Let me handle this my way." I took the keys, feeling sick to my stomach. "Fine," I said finally. "But this is insane, Dad. You know that, right?" He nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, honey. I'll make this right, I promise." But things started going downhill immediately. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Linda kept shooting me these looks across the table, all her previous warmth gone. The woman who used to bake my favorite cookies and invite me to book club now acted like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. "More potatoes, Dad?" Sophie asked, completely oblivious to the tension. "Would anyone mind if I redecorated the living room?" Linda asked suddenly, not looking at me. "The current setup is a bit dated." I gripped my fork tighter, knowing she was talking about Mom's furniture arrangement. Dad coughed awkwardly and changed the subject. The next morning, I was making coffee when Linda cornered me in the kitchen. She was still in her robe, hair uncombed, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Carol," she said, leaning against the counter. "I think we need to talk about your plans." "My plans?" "Yes. When are you planning to look for your own place? She asked it casually, like she was asking about the weather. Now that you have a job lined up, you should start thinking about moving out. You're a grown woman now, after all. I took a slow sip of coffee, counting to 10 in my head. Actually, I've talked to Dad about staying here for now. He's fine with it. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she just turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and a growing sense of dread about how this was all going to play out. The next 2 weeks were like living in a hostile environment. Linda's attitude shifted from cold to downright passive-aggressive. She'd accidentally wash my clothes with colors that would bleed, claiming she forgot which laundry basket was mine. She'd cook family dinners, but conveniently make just enough for 3 people, acting surprised when I came to the table. When I tried to watch TV in the living room, she'd suddenly need to vacuum right there. If I was using the kitchen to make breakfast, she'd barge in and start reorganizing the cabinets, muttering about how some people never learn to keep things tidy. She even moved my mother's favorite vase from its spot on the mantel to some corner shelf, claiming it didn't match her new decorating vision. The worst part was watching Sophie follow her mother's lead. My half-sister, who just weeks ago had been sending me memes and calling me for advice about boys, now rolled her eyes whenever I entered a room. She started calling me that girl when talking about me to her friends on the phone, loud enough for me to hear. Despite the tension at home, my professional life was taking off. I visited Marshall and Brooks Financial, where they showed me my future workspace, a nice corner desk with a view of downtown. My future colleagues seemed friendly and welcoming, especially Sarah from the risk assessment team, who offered to take me to lunch. "When do you start?" she asked over sandwiches. 2 weeks, I replied. Just enough time to settle in at home. That evening at dinner, I shared my start date with the family, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They showed me my office today. I start in 2 weeks. Linda's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down with exaggerated care. Well, isn't that wonderful? Once you get your first paycheck, you can start looking for your own apartment. I know of some nice complexes across town, very affordable for young professionals. I caught Dad's pleading look across the table. His eyes seemed to beg me to keep quiet, to maintain his lie just a little longer. I stabbed at my peas and said nothing. To avoid the tension at home, I started reconnecting with old high school friends. Katie and Jessica were still in town, and we'd meet for coffee or shopping trips, falling back into our old rhythms as if no time had passed. But coming home was always uncomfortable. I'd walk in and hear hushed conversations from the kitchen or living room that would stop abruptly when I appeared. Dad and Linda would spring apart like guilty teenagers, papers would be hastily shoved into drawers, and fake smiles would plaster themselves across their faces. Saturday morning, I woke up to an unusually quiet house. No sound of Linda's weekend meal prep in the kitchen, no Sophie's music blasting from her room, no Dad watching sports on TV. The silence felt wrong somehow, like the calm before a storm. I padded downstairs in my pajamas, checking each room as I went. The kitchen was spotless, not just clean, but unused since the night before. The living room was empty, the throw pillows perfectly arranged on the couch. Sophie's boots, usually cluttering the entryway, were gone. Even Dad's car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone, no messages, no notes about where everyone had gone. My first thought was that maybe they'd gone out for breakfast, but something felt off. They never went out for breakfast without at least leaving a note. Even during these tense weeks, they'd maintained that basic courtesy. I tried calling Dad first, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Weird. I tried a few more times with the same result, that automated voice telling me the person I was trying to reach was unavailable. A knot started forming in my stomach. Finally, I called Linda. She picked up on the 4th ring, just as I was about to hang up. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, hostile in a way I'd never heard before. In the background, I could hear waves and what sounded like tropical music. "I just wanted to know where everyone is," I said, caught off guard by her tone. I woke up and the house was empty. She laughed, an ugly, mean sound that made my stomach clench. Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. First-class flights, luxury resort, the works. We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along and expecting us to pay for you too. Not that you'd know anything about paying for things yourself. What? I wouldn't. Save it, she cut me off. I'm sick of this whole situation. You're nothing but a lazy freeloader, living in our house like you own the place. Your father might put up with it, but I'm done. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities? My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my mother's chairs, actually, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. Linda, No, you listen to me, she snarled. Your father never loved you, you were just an obligation. He already wasted enough money on your college education, and now you're squatting in our house like some entitled princess. Well, I've had enough. Did you think you could just live here forever? Mooching off us while we work hard to maintain this home? I could hear Sophie giggling in the background, and Dad's muffled voice saying something I couldn't make out. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. When we get back, she continued, her voice dripping with venom, I want you gone. Do you understand me? Pack your things and get out of our house. If you're still there when we return, I'll throw you out myself. And trust me, I won't be gentle about it. I don't care where you go, live on the street for all I care. You're not our problem anymore. And don't bother trying to call your father. He agrees with me, he's just too weak to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Carol, or don't. I really couldn't care less. The line went dead. I sat in that kitchen for what felt like hours, fury slowly replacing shock. They were living in my house, the house my mother had worked for, had left to me, and they had the nerve to call me a freeloader? To try to throw me out? Well, I'd had enough of playing along with Dad's lies. I blocked their numbers on my phone, my hands still shaking, but now with anger rather than hurt. Then I started methodically going through the house, gathering their belongings. Linda's expensive clothes, Sophie's school stuff, Dad's golf clubs, everything went into boxes and suitcases. I worked through the entire Saturday, fueled by rage and bitter disappointment. By Sunday morning, I had their life packed up and stacked in the garage. I found a 24-hour locksmith who could come right away. He worked quickly, replacing the locks on all the doors. It cost a small fortune, but it was worth every penny. When he finished, I handed him my credit card, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I clutched the new keys. Monday morning, I started my new job at Marshall & Brooks. For 2 weeks, I threw myself into work, learning the ropes, making new friends, trying not to think about the confrontation I knew was coming. I kept their stuff in the garage, but I rearranged the house back to how Mom had it, removing every trace of Linda's decorating vision. Then came that Friday. I pulled into the driveway after work, to find them standing there, Dad looking nervous, Linda red-faced with fury, and Sophie hanging back with a scowl. They must have just gotten back from their vacation, their suitcases were still in their rental car. Linda started screaming before I even got out of my car. How dare you change our locks? How dare you lock us out of our own house? I walked calmly past them to unlock the door. Linda followed, still yelling. We're calling the police. This is breaking and entering. This is our house. I turned to face them, something inside me finally snapping. No, Linda, it's not your house. It never was. This house belongs to me. My mother bought it before she even met Dad. She left it to me in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it, temporarily. Linda laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. She looked at Dad. Tell her she's lying. Tell her this is our house. Dad wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He just shrugged, his shoulders slumping. She's telling the truth. The house, it was always hers. I watched as the truth sank in, as Linda's face transformed from rage to calculation in a matter of seconds. Her entire demeanor changed, like a switch had been flipped. "Oh, Carol, sweetheart," she said, forcing a laugh. "You didn't think I was serious on the phone, did you? I was just joking. You know how I can get sometimes, all that sun and those tropical cocktails went to my head." "Stop it," I said quietly, but she kept going. "We're family. Remember all those nice times we had? The book club meetings, the holiday dinners? We can have that again." She took a step toward me, arms outstretched like she was going to hug me. Dad jumped in then, his voice thick with emotion. "Princess, I'm so sorry. I know I handled this all wrong, but I love you. You're my daughter. Please, can't we work this out?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The father who left when I was 9. Who paid for my education but missed my life. Who lied about my house, my inheritance, my mother's legacy. Work what out, Dad? The fact that you lied to your wife about owning my house? Or the fact that you stood by while she planned to throw me out of it? Linda turned back to me with that fake smile. "Carol, let's be reasonable. We can all live here together. We'll pay rent." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave." That's when Linda's mask cracked again. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, you'd throw your own family out on the street?" I felt oddly calm as I replied, "You just spent what, $10,000 on a luxury vacation you deliberately hid from me? Pretty sure you can afford an apartment." "Carol, please," Dad tried again, reaching for my arm. "I know I messed up, but..." "No," I cut him off. "You didn't mess up, you lied. 4 years. You let your wife believe she owned my mother's house. You watched her try to redecorate it, rearrange it, erase every trace of Mom. And when she planned to throw me out, you said nothing." "I was going to tell her the truth," he protested. "When? After I was gone? After she'd finished making my house her home?" I shook my head. "I'm done. Get your things and get out." I walked inside and closed the door, ignoring Linda's screams about ingratitude and cruelty. Through the window, I watched them loading boxes from the garage into their rental car. Linda was still yelling, her face red with fury. Sophie was crying. Dad just looked defeated. It took them 3 trips to get everything. As they loaded the last box, Dad tried one more time, knocking on the door. I didn't open it. They finally left as the sun was setting. The next day, Dad tried calling from a new number. "Carol, please," he begged. "We can fix this." "No, Dad, we can't," I said. "Linda made it very clear how you all really feel about me. A freeloader? An obligation? Someone you never loved?" Maybe those were her words, but your silence said enough. That was 2 months ago. I still live in Mom's house, my house. I've repainted the walls, planted new roses in the garden, made it mine again. Sometimes I think about them, wonder where they ended up. But mostly, I think about Mom, and how she made sure I'd always have a home, no matter what. Dad still tries to call sometimes, from different numbers. I don't pick up anymore. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. The funny thing is, I'm happier now. My job is going well, I've made new friends at work, and for the first time since Mom died, I feel at peace in this house. Sometimes healing means letting go, of people, of lies, of the fairy tale of family you wanted to believe in.